made a scream the last time you were on the air last week. Yeah, it just blew my mind. That scream occurred when you hit the alien coming from inside the freezer. Here it comes. Oh my God, that's awful. Oh God, that's awful.
One of the most creepy, incredible stories you'll ever hear. Jonathan Reed says that he was out with his dog Susie, hiking. His dog breaks loose and starts running. He starts following his dog and he hears his dog yelping. When he gets there, he comes upon the scene of seeing a 4 to 5 foot tall creature who has his dog by both jaws and is ripping it apart. Pull out a video camera and his still camera he had in his bag and start photographing this thing.
In the fall of 1996, Dr. Jonathan Reed, an alleged Seattle-based psychologist, experienced an event that challenged the boundaries of reality. Hiking with his golden retriever, Susie, in the Cascade Mountains near Seattle, Reed encountered what he claims was an extraterrestrial life form. That day, while the pair wandered through the wilderness, Susie dashed off into the woods after something that had caught her attention. After a few minutes of searching for her, Reed was drawn to a strange, high-pitched, oscillating sound. As he approached the source of the noise, he stumbled upon a nightmarish scene. Worst, he rushed toward the sound. What he saw blew his mind. An alien, about the size of a small kid, was standing there. Susie had her teeth locked onto its arm. Then, in a shocking twist, the alien grabbed Susie's jaws and tore her apart, turning her into white ash. Furious, Reed grabbed a tree branch and knocked the alien out cold. Below is the footage Reed shot after everything went down, and it's what most people have seen.
Actually, in a defensive or fearful sounding bark, and it was just chaos sounding. I mean, it wasn't just one or two, it was just almost non-stop.
The creature was unlike anything Reed had ever seen. It was about 4 feet tall with a skeletal humanoid frame. Its skin was an eerie mix of gray and white, and its large, black, almond-shaped eyes were devoid of emotion. Reed reported that the creature seemed to be wearing a seamless metallic black suit that covered its entire body. According to Jonathan, the creature was described as humanoid, with a height of around 4 feet. It had large, black, almond-shaped eyes, and its skin was gray-white, almost like parchment. Its body was stiff and cold, and it didn't seem to have a muscular system like humans do. It didn't have a nose or ears, and its mouth was merely a small slit. Reed claimed that the creature wore a black metallic garment that was extremely resilient, and a silver bracelet on its left wrist. In a state of shock and grief over the loss of Susie, Reed picked up a large branch and struck the creature, which fell unconscious.
I was close. I was probably within 50 to 75 feet of her. And I dropped my backpack that I had, and I picked up a branch that happened to be laying on the ground that was about 6 or 7 feet long, about the width of a baseball bat. And I thought I can at least defend her off of some, animal. I found myself face to face with this creature, this small, childlike in size creature.
Reed then did something utterly astonishing. He brought the creature and an obelisk-shaped device it had been holding home with him. Now for the evidence. Over the next few days, Reed took numerous photographs and videos of the creature and the device. The device, according to Reed, had the ability to render the creature and itself invisible and create a distortion field around them. Reed also reported that the creature was alive for a short period in his home before it vanished, leaving behind only the device.
Backtrack a little bit. When you played a scream the last time you were on the air last week, it just blew my mind. That scream occurred when you hit the alien. When did the scream occur? I still heard a sound, scratching sound, almost a skunk scratching sound. It was coming from inside the freezer. The force of the sound
made me feel like something was pushing against your chest.
Play the sound for us once again, please.
Yeah, I will. Hold on.
Okay, here it comes.
Oh my God, it's awful. Again, it happened very quickly.
Jonathan Reed claimed to have a plethora of evidence supporting his alien encounter. He captured the entity and the obelisk-like device it was holding in a series of photographs and videos.
I caught myself before I actually hit the ground, and I realized I was touching something that didn't belong in the forest. It was a big, black, wedge-shaped thing. I mean, definitely not natural to the forest.
Which he later shared with the public. Here are the primary pieces of evidence Reed presented. Photographs and videos. The most compelling evidence Reed provided were images and video recordings of the alleged extraterrestrial entity and the mysterious device. The device, on the other hand, was obelisk-shaped and, according to Reed, had the power to render the creature and itself invisible and create a distortion field around them, the physical evidence. Reed claimed to have retained physical evidence from his encounter. This included the obelisk-like device that he said could manipulate time and space, and a strange metallic bracelet that was reportedly on the creature's wrist.
Today I placed this on my arm. I have no idea why, other than maybe I was programmed to do so. It's a teleportation transfer device and communication device.
He also claimed that his dog, Susie, was killed by the creature, further solidifying the tangible impact of the encounter. Witness testimony. Reed's friend Robert Wraith vouched for his story. Wraith claimed to have seen the creature while it was in Reed's home, providing a second-hand witness account of the incident. Biological samples. Reed also claimed to have taken biological samples from the creature, including tissue and blood. However, the results of the analysis of these samples have been controversial, with some reports suggesting non-human DNA, and others dismissing the samples as fraudulent. Personal accounts. Reed's detailed personal accounts of the incident, which he shared on various radio shows and public forums, form an integral part of his evidence. The skepticism. His vivid descriptions and emotional recounting of the event added a layer of apparent authenticity to his narrative. Despite the comprehensive collection of evidence that Reed has put forth, his assertions have not been immune to skepticism and doubt. Critics have consistently raised questions regarding the reliability and authenticity of his photographic and video evidence, pointing to perceived discrepancies in his narrative and highlighting the absence of independent confirmation of his physical and biological findings.
I've come here to personally hear your story and to hear your response to it. And Jonathan, you're not being truthful with me.
In spite of these contentious points, Reed's account endures as one of the most renowned and fervently debated stories within the chronicles of UFO encounters. Reed's astonishing tale rapidly captured the imagination of both UFO aficionados and skeptics alike, causing ripples throughout the community. His story gained further notoriety as he appeared on esteemed radio programs such as Coast to Coast AM, where he shared the intricacies of his bewildering experience, along with the evidence he had gathered over time. Nevertheless, Reed's narrative has not been without its detractors. Many observers have labeled his story as an intricate hoax, citing inconsistencies within his account and pointing to the lack of substantial evidence as indicators of its dubious nature. Appearance on fact or faked paranormal files.
When I came here that day, right up here through that opening in the trees is where I came over and I saw my dog entangled with this thing, and my dog was screaming for her life.
In the show Fact or Faked, the show team investigated Reed's claims, analyzing the artifact, the so-called link, and reviewing Reed's footage. Ultimately, the team found inconsistencies and anomalies in the evidence, leading them to conclude that Reed's story lacked credibility. The investigation did not substantiate his claims of alien encounter, leaving the case unresolved and viewed with skepticism by the show's experts. One thing I'd like to add is When they record his audio and determine that his voice detected deception, I'm not really sure how that affects his truthfulness. I do believe there are lots of things to be skeptical about, and the likelihood of this encounter happening is probably very low. But the way the show shows them concluding that it's false is kind of a little on the dramatic side.
This little creature pulling her jaw apart.
Despite the ongoing debate and controversy surrounding his claims, Reed's story continues to be one of the most captivating and hotly contested cases in the annals of UFO history. Whether one chooses to embrace or dismiss Reed's alleged encounter, it undeniably stimulates reflection and discussion about the potential existence of extraterrestrial life and the broader implications for our understanding of reality. We are eager to hear what you think about this intriguing case. Please share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments section below. For more.
They saw me hanging outside my window in a beam of light.
There were 23 witnesses. I thought it was a movie. Special effects. I don't know why they're keeping it from the public.
Close. There was no response.
The greatest case.
Into our deep dive on what the hell happened to
This thing actually happened.
It is 1989, the year before the 1990s arrive with their inevitable technological optimism and the false promise that the internet will solve all our problems. In Manhattan, a woman named Linda Napolitano is about to have the kind of night that would make most people question their grip on sanity, the laws of physics, and whether they should have stayed in bed and pretended everything was normal. Instead, she woke up paralyzed, surrounded by beings described as pale, humanoid creatures with large, round heads and enormous black eyes. Then she floated through solid objects while being escorted by these mysterious visitors, and by the end of it all, she would become the central figure in a narrative so tangled, so improbable, and so thoroughly documented with such questionable documentation that it would eventually land on Netflix as a documentary miniseries called The Manhattan Alien Abduction, which is either the best proof that wild stories can captivate millions, or the best evidence that we collectively enjoy watching train wrecks unfold in slow motion. Act 1. The Night Everything Got Weird. Part 1. On the evening in question, shortly after 3 a.m. on November 30th, 1989, Linda Napolitano was in her apartment in Lower Manhattan, specifically in a building not far from the Brooklyn Bridge, when she began to feel an odd sensation starting in her feet, a numbness that crept upward like an unwanted guest who had let themselves in and decided to make themselves completely at home in her nervous system. The numbness was unusual, sure, but what came next was the kind of thing that separates a bad dream from a genuinely alarming situation where you start wondering if you need to call someone. When she opened her eyes, standing at the foot of her bed was a creature that looked nothing like anything she expected to see in her bedroom at 3 in the morning. This being was pale, humanoid in shape, but decidedly inhuman in appearance, with a disproportionately large, round head and dark eyes that seemed to take up most of its face, the kind of eyes that probably belonged on an animal, not a bipedal creature standing in your bedroom in the middle of the night. If you have ever woken from sleep with that disorienting feeling where reality seems slightly off, multiply that by 1,000, and you might approach what Linda experienced in that moment, except worse. Because this was not a dream, or at least that is what she insists to this day. But wait, there is more, because one being was apparently not enough to make the evening sufficiently unsettling. From behind the curtains emerged another creature, and then another, and then several more, until there were roughly 5 to 7 visitors in her bedroom, which is either a remarkably well-coordinated team effort or perhaps the most inappropriately timed home invasion in recorded history. These beings moved silently and slowly, which sounds almost polite if not for the fact that they were advancing toward a paralyzed woman in her own bed. Linda called out for her husband, Steve, who was sleeping right there beside her, presumably unaware that his bedroom was about to become the setting for the most extraordinary event in their entire marriage. He did not respond. She called again, but Steve continued sleeping with the persistence of someone who had either taken industrial-strength sedatives or was simply the world's heaviest sleeper. The numbness that had started in her feet had now reached her neck, immobilizing her almost completely. When she tried to scream, she heard not a sound from her lips, but rather a voice inside her mind. A presence that issued a command, silent but unmistakable. Be quiet, do not scream. And remarkably, Linda found herself complying. Whether because she was terrified, because the command was somehow irresistible, or because she recognized on some level that screaming would accomplish nothing, she went silent. Then came the levitation. Linda felt herself rising above the bed, floating upward into the air like some kind of reverse gravity experiment gone right instead of wrong. She drifted from the bedroom into the living room, while her pale visitors accompanied her in their soundless procession. Then, something truly impossible happened, or at least it seemed impossible. She floated through a closed window and past the safety bars that had been installed on the exterior of the apartment to prevent people from falling or invading from outside, except that she did not break the glass, did not disturb the bars. She simply passed through them as if they were not there, hovering outside her 12th-story apartment surrounded by a bright blue light that illuminated the night sky over Manhattan.
Here she is floating over the New York skyline.
Linda claims that she is being pulled towards a giant UFO. As Linda is pulled into the UFO, the surrounding neighborhood experiences a major power outage.
And not just in the buildings, but on the street also. Cars were dying right in the middle of the street.
The craft itself, when it came into view, was described as saucer-shaped, like something out of a 1950s B-movie, except that Linda was allegedly living inside the B-movie, rather than watching it from the safety of a dark theater. She ascended gradually into this craft along with her visitors, crossing from the night sky of New York City into an interior space that she would later describe as containing volcanic fire, a detail that raises questions about ET engineering standards and fire safety regulations. Or perhaps suggests that Linda was experiencing something far stranger than the straightforward encounter narrative might suggest. Once inside, the beings guided her down a hallway furnished with benches, which is somehow both the most mundane and most surreal detail imaginable. Various rooms seemed to line this hallway, and as they passed by, Linda heard doors hissing open and closing, a sound that belongs in either a spaceship or a hospital. The beings conversed among themselves in a language that sounded entirely unintelligible to Linda, a series of sounds that her mind could not parse into anything resembling human speech. Eventually, they arrived at a brightly lit room with a long table at its center, a setting that inspired panic in Linda. Her mind began to race with thoughts about what might happen to her in a room with a table and beings who were clearly capable of moving her through solid matter. She started shouting in her mind, her thoughts somehow translating into an alien language, a detail that raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and communication across species lines, or suggests that Linda possessed some form of latent telepathic ability, or more skeptically, that the entire encounter was a vivid dream or hallucination dressed up in the clothes of alien contact. One of the beings placed a hand over her mouth, a gesture that seems almost gentle, except for the context of her paralysis and captivity. Then it produced a long medical instrument and inserted it into her right nostril, a procedure that none of us would willingly consent to under any circumstances. Yet another being approached and began running its hand through her hair and placing a comforting hand on her cheek as if attempting to soothe her during what was clearly an invasive medical procedure. When Linda asked why she was there, what the purpose of this encounter was, the being replied in a way that translated to her mind as just for a visit, which is perhaps the most understated response possible to an encounter that involved paralysis, levitation, passing through solid matter, and nasal instrumentation. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the experience shifted. Linda found herself able to move again. She sat up in her bed and heard a loud roar, as if the entire experience had been sucked back into a vortex of sound and sensation. She looked around and found herself in her bed, back in her apartment, back in the familiar surroundings of her bedroom at some impossible hour of the night. She tried to wake her husband, Steve, but he remained motionless, deep in a sleep so profound that nothing she did seemed to penetrate it. She ran to her son's room and found them similarly unresponsive. She checked on her youngest, Johnny, and found him too locked in whatever deep sleep had overcome him. She reportedly placed a mirror under her son's nose to confirm he was breathing, a practical gesture of maternal worry in the midst of what would otherwise be completely inexplicable circumstances. The witnesses emerge. Days or weeks later, depending on the timeline, a letter arrived at the apartment of Bud Hopkins, a ufologist who had been documenting cases that he believed represented genuine encounters between humans and extraterrestrial beings. Hopkins ran support groups for people who claim to have experienced ET encounters, which is either a genuine service to traumatized people or an echo chamber for sharing and reinforcing increasingly elaborate narratives depending on your perspective. The letter came from two men identifying themselves as Dan and Richard, police officers who claimed to have witnessed something extraordinary on the night in question. They described guilt that had been lingering, difficult emotions, and uncertainty about whether they should try to locate the woman they had allegedly seen being taken into a craft over the East River. Hopkins recognized the name mentioned in their letter. Linda Napolitano had been attending his support groups. This was remarkable. The first time Hopkins had received multiple witness accounts of the same event, corroboration from people outside of Linda's immediate circle, and subjective experience. Approximately 2 weeks after receiving the letter, Linda herself called Hopkins. She was agitated, speaking in rushed tones about two detectives named Richard and Dan who had just shown up at her door. It had been close to 11 p.m. when Linda heard the knock. Through the peephole, she saw two men in dark suits. They identified themselves as detectives. She let them in, and there, in her living room, stood Richard and Dan, the same men who had written the letter to Bud Hopkins, now manifested in physical form, with faces and voices and the ability to sit in her living room and discuss what they had all apparently witnessed. Act 2. The men in suits and the complications of credibility. According to Linda's account, Dan was somewhat aloof and distant, the kind of person who keeps their emotions locked away behind a professional facade. Richard, on the other hand, was kind but nervous. At one point during their conversation, Richard appeared on the verge of tears, suggesting that whatever he had witnessed had affected him deeply. The conversation lasted about 30 minutes, during which Linda recounted her experience in detail. She told them about the numbness, the beings, the levitation, the craft, and crucially, she told them about how her husband and children had been placed into such a profound sleep that she could not rouse them for several hours. She had put a mirror under her son's nose to check for breath, a detail that humanizes the experience and suggests genuine maternal concern. Even in the midst of what seems like fantasy, Linda asked Richard and Dan to contact Bud Hopkins and confirm her story, to provide their witness testimony and help validate her account. They declined, uncomfortable with the idea of stepping into the public eye with such an extraordinary claim. They had good reasons to be hesitant. Associating oneself with claims of ET encounters can damage professional credibility in ways that are difficult to recover from. After they left, Linda thought the matter might be over, but it was not. Another letter arrived for Hopkins, this time accompanied by an audio tape. The tape contained Richard's voice, speaking alone, recounting the events of the night that Linda had been taken. He expressed hope that his recording would be useful to Bud. Despite his unwillingness to publicly confirm the story, he described his memory of Linda's expressionless, pale face and the three beings escorting her into the craft. The audio documentation added a layer of credibility to the narrative, or at least it seemed to.
The apartment was very disoriented and embarrassed. This is what he said to me.
I suppose Linda has already spoken to you about our unexpected visit to her apartment one evening. Indeed, it was very uncomfortable, to say the least. The subject matter was the strangest ever in my line of work. With my binoculars, I could see Linda was there, in this beam of light. My partner screamed. I felt as though I had lost my breath. What happened left us all victims to circumstance. After actually seeing her and speaking with her, we could see just how frightened and sincere she was. Please respect the importance about credibility at work just can't be identified and be laughed at.
Richard and Dan were grappling with what they had witnessed. Richard coped by secretly watching Linda, positioning himself where he could see her without her knowing. It is a disturbing detail that gets lost in the larger narrative, the fact that one of the supposed witnesses was stalking Linda without her consent, though Richard apparently believed that seeing Linda in her everyday life, confirming her existence and normalcy, somehow eased his feelings of insanity, validated the experience by confirming that the woman existed and went about her life. Dan did not handle the stress as well. For Dan, seeing Linda was not comforting but rather a painful reminder of the incident, a trigger for anxiety and confusion. Dan sent Hopkins a letter expressing anger, fear, and embarrassment. The emotional toll of the encounter, or the claim of the encounter, had clearly affected him profoundly. Linda, for her part, noted a white van parked near her building. She felt watched. The November encounter remained the most distressing event in her life, or so she claimed. The feeling of being observed and studied was adding another layer of violation to an already disturbing experience, real or imagined. Trauma is trauma when you are experiencing it. Act 3. The unraveling of official identity. Hopkins decided to locate these detectives. He visited police precincts across the city, posted flyers asking for information about officers named Richard and Dan. No one came forward. No record existed of these two men in the NYPD. The reason became apparent when additional information arrived. Richard and Dan were not actually police officers at all. They had lied to Linda, or more accurately, they had misrepresented their professional identities in order to gain credibility and access. They were actually security personnel, providing protection for a man of considerable international significance, a man who happened to be driving to the downtown heliport on the night in question when their car stalled near Linda's building. All three of them witnessed something extraordinary in the sky. The man they were protecting was Javier Pérez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the United Nations, a position that places someone in the upper echelon of global diplomacy and international visibility, which led Richard and Dan to impersonate police officers, a deception designed to protect their employer's privacy and reputation. While the Secretary General was apparently relieved to hear about Linda's safety, he wanted nothing further to do with the event. He had apparently seen enough. De Cuellar's representatives would later deny his involvement entirely, claiming he was asleep at home that night, which raises the question of how a man can simultaneously witness an extraordinary event and be asleep in his home. Richard and Dan, however, continued to struggle with their emotions. They could not simply move on and pretend the night had not happened. A few weeks later, Linda was walking to the supermarket when she ran into Richard. He invited her to take a ride in a nearby luxury car so they could talk. Linda declined, citing her errands, but she offered an invitation to come to her apartment later that evening. Richard insisted on the ride, becoming more forceful in his invitation.
Bud came up with this idea of wiring her for sound.
Testing. The microphone was in my pocket, the speaker was in my ear. One day, I was walking up Cherry Street, and I see this black car, and who's standing outside the car was Richard and Dan.
He's standing across the street, watching. God, I gotta get the hell out of here. Oh God, he's coming. I don't see him anywhere. What the hell is it?
I didn't want to get into the car. I didn't want to have anything to do with them, period. But here I was sitting in the car, and we just took off.
Checkpoint, you want it? No, I'm not white. It's not off. I need help. You really need help. Oh, stop it. Oh, no. What? Come here.
that bastard, Dan, used to call me a half-breed.
Stop it!
He actually thought I was half human, half alien.
I want to go home. Why don't you let me out of the car?
And I took out the gun. I says to him, I'm holding a gun, and you better watch out, because I'm going to shoot your balls off. And he stopped the car, and I ran away and called Bud.
Hello?
Linda?
They cleared me by 317.
Oh, Linda, tell me what happened.
He went nuts. He grabbed me by my shoulders and started to shake me, so I was dizzy.
Oh, Linda.
Then I had this son of a bitch on tape.
Okay, Linda, get off film, come on over, okay?
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.
Linda complied, though she found the entire situation absurd. They finally dropped her off at her apartment building, the Knickerbocker Village, located just off Catherine Slip and Cherry Street, ending the interrogation but not the strangeness. Act 4. Escalation, confusion, and the Lady of the Sands. Dan apologized for his behavior, admitting that there was no excuse for forcing Linda into a car and interrogating her for hours, but attributing it to the tremendous stress he had been under. It is a non-apology that attempts to explain but not fully justify. It was revealed that Richard, Dan, and Secretary General de Cuellar had all experienced a shared memory that had been triggered over the previous months. After the craft disappeared into the river, the three men found themselves on a beach where they saw Linda and three ETs digging in the sand for some odd reason. They heard the beings conversing in their alien language. When Linda and the ETs approached them, Linda held up a dead fish and accused them as her expression remained blank and strained and said, "Look and see what you have done." Then one of the ETs referred to her as the Lady of the Sands, a title that sounds simultaneously mystical and completely absurd, like something from a fantasy novel written by someone who had never actually been to a beach. Dan, in his continuing correspondence with Hopkins, expressed frustration at feeling like Linda was withholding information when they had questioned her in April. Perhaps she was scared. Perhaps she did not trust their intentions. They had become convinced that Linda was the Lady of the Sands, that she occupied some special category, some role that they did not yet understand. Dan confessed his annoyance with Linda, claiming that even if she flew to the moon in her own spacecraft, the distance would not be far enough for him, a comment that suggests his grip on reality was loosening considerably. He still wanted to have a sincere conversation with her. Though he acknowledged she would not want that conversation, he requested that Bud prepare Linda for a visit from him, and he insisted repeatedly that they, the ETs, and Linda and all the witnesses, did not kill the fish. Bud Hopkins decided to hypnotize Linda under regressive hypnosis, a technique that has been heavily criticized as a method for uncovering genuine memories since it is remarkably effective at generating false memories and reinforcing narratives that have been suggested to the subject.
Go to the bed. By now, my knees are numb. And then it got on top of the bed, and it crouched down, looked me straight in the eye, and hissed.
Under hypnosis, Linda remembered the beach, the digging for sand samples, the dead fish, the ETS conversing in their language. She remembered being called the Lady of the Sands, but could not explain the meaning of the title. She was uncertain about its significance, which raises questions about the whole endeavor. If the hypnosis was recovering genuine memories, why could she not remember what the title meant? Why did important details remain obscured? On October 15th, Dan apparently arrived at Linda's location in broad daylight and grabbed her, forcing her into his car. He was, by all accounts, not in a stable state of mind. During the drive, he pulled over, called her a half-breed, and kissed her repeatedly on the face while periodically grabbing her knee. The behavior suggests either a psychological breakdown or something darker and more difficult to articulate. They drove to a beach house on Long Island where Dan told Linda to make herself comfortable while he made coffee. Linda searched for a phone or any identifying information that might help her. finding nothing except 2 framed photographs, one showing Linda saying goodbye to her son Johnny, and another showing Linda by a lighthouse. Both pictures featured Linda, which raises questions about their provenance. Why did Dan have photographs of Linda in his beach house? How long had he been watching her? When Dan returned from the kitchen, he had a gift-wrapped box, which he instructed Linda to open and wear. The box contained a negligee. Linda refused, but seeing anger in Dan's eyes, she offered a compromise. She would wear it over her clothes. Dan agreed to this modification. Then something shifted. Dan went pale, fell to his knees, and began crying. He exclaimed, "It was you, Lady of the Sands?" As if a crucial piece of reality had suddenly crystallized for him, as if he had finally understood something that had eluded him all along. Linda, recognizing an opportunity, escaped onto the beach, ran outside, trying to put distance between herself and the man who seemed to be having a complete psychological dissolution. Dan caught up with her and attacked her, but Richard, who was apparently present at the beach house for reasons that remain unclear, intervened and de-escalated the situation, dragging Dan away and preventing further harm. The scene reads like the climax of a deeply disturbing psychological thriller. Act 5. The skeptics arrive and start asking questions. Investigators George Hansen, Richard Butler, and Joseph Stafula decided to examine the entire narrative with a skeptical eye. They interviewed Linda, conducted extensive research into the claims, examined the documentation, and came to the conclusion that the entire story was fabricated or at least heavily contaminated with fiction and invention. The first obstacle was obvious. Linda was the only direct witness to the actions of Richard and Dan. Their interrogation of her, the beach house, the violent encounter. However, there were audio tapes, recordings that other individuals had listened to. There were supposedly multiple witnesses to the core encounter itself. They investigated Janet Kimball, a woman who allegedly had her car stall on the Brooklyn Bridge during a related incident.
I'm standing at exactly the spot where this very strange event was seen at 3 a.m. really on November 30th, 1989. A woman was driving from Brooklyn to New York, right down here in the outer lane. Her car engine died, the lights went out, and she looked over to this building, the one in the distance with a little pointed roof, and at that point she saw a burst of light as a UFO hovering only a few feet above it turned on all of its lights. 2 small figures below her and one above her.
When they examined her letter to Bud Hopkins, handwriting analysis indicated that the letter was written by Linda, not by Janet Kimball. It was a forgery. Possibly Linda impersonating another witness to create the illusion of corroboration. Linda also claimed her cousin Connie had been present during an attempted kidnapping. Bud contacted Connie. He came to believe that Linda had called him pretending to be her cousin, presenting herself as a separate witness to lend credibility to the narrative. These were significant blows to the story's credibility.
Bud and DeQuayar met in the VIP lounge at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, arranged by a reporter who had an appointment to do an interview with DeQuayar, was aware of this story, a colleague of Bud's, and essentially set up this opportunity for Hopkins to speak with the Secretary General.
The alleged meeting between Secretary General DeQuayar and Bud Hopkins at O'Hare Airport, supposedly a moment of crucial corroboration, had never been witnessed by anyone outside of Hopkins and DeQuayar. If the meeting had occurred at all, DeQuayar's representatives issued statements denying his involvement entirely, claiming he had been asleep at home on the night in question. An office statement from the Secretary General's team flatly rejected any suggestion of involvement. One of the major problems with Linda's account was her failure to report the assaults, the abduction, to law enforcement. When asked why she had not gone to the police, she cited fear for her safety and her family's safety. Even when Bud Hopkins encouraged her to file reports, she resisted. Skeptics pointed out that someone who had been assaulted and would reasonably be expected to file police reports. Yet no reports existed. Steve, Linda's husband, was largely silent during interviews. He had difficulty answering questions. Linda would often interject to help him remember events. Eventually, Steve left the interview early. Steve's reluctance to engage with the narrative might suggest skepticism about his wife's account, or it might suggest trauma and a desire to distance himself from the chaos. Linda's fascination with aliens and UFOs, and her contact with Bud Hopkins shortly after reading his book Intruders, suggests that her encounter narrative might have been influenced or inspired by what she had read. A sci-fi novel called Night Eyes was released a few months before Linda contacted Bud, and it contained elements similar to her account, suggesting possible narrative contamination or inspiration. The loading dock of the New York Post was located with a view of Lower Manhattan, and at 3 a.m., the dock would have been bustling with workers, loading trucks for the morning edition. Yet none of these workers reported seeing a UFO or anything unusual. When investigators interviewed the dock manager, they discovered he spent most of his shift in an office away from the actual loading area that would have faced Linda's apartment building. So the negative testimony was not as strong as skeptics claimed, but it was still a notable absence of corroborating witnesses in a densely populated area. Act 6. The Endless Complications and Uncertain Truths. From the loading zone of Linda's building, investigators determined it was impossible to see her residence. Casting further doubt on the skeptical argument about observable witnesses, Bud Hopkins maintained that Linda's story remained consistent over a span of 10 years. However, individuals who had attended her speeches at UFO conventions noted alterations in details over time. The story seemed to shift and change, certain elements being emphasized or de-emphasized depending on context. Linda initially stated she would receive 50% of any income generated from book sales or a potential movie deal related to her story. She later retracted this claim, then admitted she had been lying on purpose, then clarified that she had received a percentage, albeit a small one. Later, it was discovered that Linda had actually received between 15 and 25% of the profits from book sales, movie rights, or any other derivatives of her story. The shifting claims about financial arrangements fueled suspicion about her motivations. If Linda is fabricating this entire saga, she has managed to involve numerous individuals in the narrative. Bud Hopkins possesses multiple witness testimonials on both audio and video, which have been validated by some observers. However, Linda has also made increasingly outrageous claims that stretch credulity to breaking points. She asserted that she was part E.T., that she possessed immortal red blood cells, that she was a descendant of Joan of Arc, that she had been a professional singer in a renowned pop band. Oh wait, she actually was a singer? That she had met Cardinal O'Connor, that she had been invited to a private audience with the Pope, and that she had been present in the World Trade Center during the 9/11 attacks. These claims escalate from unusual to impossible. They suggest either an extraordinary life of unlikely coincidences, or a person who is either fabricating stories or suffering from a psychological condition that manifests as elaborate false memories or fantastical claims. Bud Hopkins was aware of these increasingly outlandish claims, but chose to omit them from his book. Including them would have undermined the credibility of his entire investigation. Supporters of Hopkins praise him as an exceptional and dedicated investigator, while critics point out that he had a strong preference for interviewing and hypnotizing individuals whose stories confirmed his existing belief in ET encounters. His investigations lacked the objectivity necessary for genuine scientific inquiry. According to his own wife, Carol, he prioritized crafting a compelling narrative rather than seeking objective truth. He reacted defensively and with anger when his story was questioned or challenged. His credibility as an objective investigator is therefore significantly compromised. He appeared to genuinely want to help individuals who felt frightened, ashamed, or isolated by their experiences. This made him susceptible to manipulation by people like Linda, or it made him a sincere advocate for people who had experienced genuine trauma. Depending on perspective, the complexity of human motivation means that Hopkins could simultaneously be a flawed investigator with built-in biases and a genuinely compassionate person trying to help others. These are not mutually exclusive categories. Speculation about Linda's motives centers on whether she was seeking attention or monetary gain. Her status transformed from being a housewife, a relatively ordinary position in American life, to becoming a celebrity within the UFO community, a role that she appeared to actively relish and enjoy. She gave speeches at conventions, participated in interviews, became a recognized figure in the world of paranormal investigation. For someone transitioning from ordinary domestic life, this kind of attention and notoriety could be intoxicating. It could serve as validation and confirmation that her life mattered, that her experiences were significant, that she was important. Despite the bizarre nature of this story, its authenticity remains unconfirmed even after 35 years. No individual has stepped forward to reveal the entire narrative as a deliberate hoax. This absence of confession does not prove the story is true. Absence of evidence is not evidence of presence. But it does mean that if the story is false, it has been maintained consistently and without confession for decades. The narrative ultimately hinges on Linda's testimony, creating a polarizing situation where observers must either believe in the entirety of the events or dismiss them completely. Accepting one part of her story means accepting all of it, because the encounters with Richard and Dan and the beach house incident are all interwoven. Rejecting one thread unravels the whole tapestry. Audiences are presented with all available information and left to form their own conclusions about what is credible, what is possible, and what belongs in the category of human experience. We have not yet learned to explain. Act 7. Netflix's documentary reboot of Linda's case brought her decades-old encounters back into headlines, sparking renewed debate, investigative re-examinations, and a fresh wave of public curiosity that included think pieces, podcast deep dives, and social media threads. The series framed her story for a new generation while also prompting skeptics and supporters to revisit old evidence and interview transcripts. Since the program aired, Linda has mostly receded from mainstream media life, making occasional, purposeful appearances at UFO conferences, smaller community events, and a handful of interviews with outlets that cover paranormal or investigative topics. These limited engagements suggest she remains connected to the ufology community without courting broader celebrity. Outside those appearances, she has maintained a deliberately low profile, reportedly avoiding tabloid publicity and large-scale network television spots. Friends and community contacts describe her as living privately while navigating the lingering emotional and social fallout of the case. Public records and reliable reporting provide no recent independently confirmed details about her exact whereabouts or day-to-day life, which leaves the documentary as the most prominent, widely seen update on her story and ensures that many questions about her current circumstances remain open. These targeted engagements allow her to reach sympathetic or curious audiences while avoiding constant tabloid scrutiny. The series also generated renewed online discussion and media re-examinations, which produced both supportive attention and skeptical scrutiny. As a result, she and her supporters seem to prefer controlled settings, panels, moderated interviews, and small events over frequent national TV appearances. Furthermore, there are no widely verified, up-to-date reports indicating she has sought ongoing mainstream publicity. Instead, public contact has been sporadic and carefully managed. Conclusion: the paradox of extraordinary claims. Regardless of whether one believes Linda's story to be factual or a fabrication, proving either stance remains a profound challenge. We do not have conclusive evidence in either direction. We have testimony, we have recordings, we have investigators with different agendas and different standards of evidence. We have cultural context and narrative precedents, but we do not have definitive proof. After 35 years, the case of Linda Napolitano remains in a state of productive ambiguity. It forces us to confront questions about how we know what is real, how we evaluate testimony, how trauma manifests, and what role belief plays in constructing our understanding of the world. The story also reflects a particular moment in American culture. The 1980s and 1990s saw a flourishing of interest in UFO encounters and alien contact narratives. Television shows and movies explored these themes. Books became bestsellers, support groups formed, there was a cultural hunger for evidence of contact with something beyond ourselves. Linda's story emerged into this receptive cultural environment, shaped by it and possibly shaped by the narrative expectations of that environment. Whether her encounter was genuine or constructed, it was certainly influenced by the culture it emerged within.
This is Whitley Strieber. I wish to warn you, so there is very frightening screaming. It should not be listened to by little children.
You have to understand that they are here.
I saw something that looked like it had a hood on it. And I don't want it to be there. I don't know what it is either, Daddy.
Oh my God, that's awful. Oh God, that's awful.
Before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now let's go explore Whitley Strieber's terrifying story, Communion. The December night and the immediate aftermath. The reported incident reads like a sleep clinic note crossed with Gothic memoir on a cold December night in 1985 at his upstate New York cabin. Strieber said he woke to paralysis, hyperclear perception, and the impression of being in the presence of small humanoid figures with big heads and dark eyes. Those images, familiar now from countless pop culture riffs, appeared in his sketches and in the hypnotic regression transcripts he later published. The episodes, he claimed, repeated over weeks and months and left him with a sense of being observed, handled, and sometimes communicated with in ways that bypass ordinary language. When Communion hit the shelves, it combined memoir, sketches, hypnosis sessions, and philosophical musings. The package was combustible. Readers either felt seen by his candor or enraged by what they took to be a mix of fantasy and gullibility. The book vaulted him out of the niche and into mainstream debate.
One of them, they made noises. There was noise downstairs. And I woke up and saw one of them standing in the doorway of the bedroom. I became terribly nervous.
You have to understand that they are here.
It was embraced as testimony by some, ridiculed by others, and from the looks of it, Christopher Walken didn't take the role seriously enough, or he was either coked out of his mind. It was the 80s after all.
Get up! I'm cooking. I'm on a roll. What's the matter with you?
Polarized responses. People split into two camps over Strieber's account. On one side were other experiencers, UFO researchers, and sympathetic readers who treated Communion as both a model and a validation. They pointed to similarities across cases, the small bodies, big heads, and the emotional fallout witnesses reported. These advocates argued that the patterning and depth of reports suggested something more than ordinary dream phenomena. They used words like consistency and continuity, as if assembling an academic case. On the other side were psychologists, neurologists, and skeptical journalists who framed the core features of Strieber's experience in clinical terms. Sleep paralysis brings temporary immobility and intense hallucinations. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic states spill dreamlike images into waking life, and even hypnosis, useful in therapy, can lead to made-up memories. Critics argued that cultural templates and story expectations shape what people remember, and that hypnotic regression is dangerously close to filling gaps with suggestion. Both camps have passionate, sometimes funny defenders. One side clings to cross-case patterns like priceless artifacts. The other waves lab gear and careful methods around like a moral duty. Strieber's evolving interpretation. Unlike someone who plants a flag and refuses to budge, Strieber's public trajectory shows ambivalence and intellectual curiosity. He continued to undergo therapy, to pursue hypnotic regression, and to record and analyze accounts. He admitted that sleep, dissociation, and memory processes might be implicated, yet he also pointed to puzzling consistencies and transformative impacts that, he argued, resist simple psychological reduction. Rather than settle on a single explanatory box, he assembled a buffet of frames. Psychological and neurological models shared table space, with spiritual and metaphysical accounts. Hybrid theories about interdimensional intelligences got their moment, and cultural analyses of how societies make meaning of anomalous events rounded out the menu. Think of it as scholarly eclecticism, seasoned with a fair amount of existential seasoning. This mix made him maddening to hardliners and interesting to those who prefer nuance over binary solutions. In 1995, Strieber and his wife set up the Communion Foundation, turning what had been a loose, grassroots scene into something more official. The foundation aimed to support experiencers, collect testimonies, and promote research. With conferences, workshops, publications, and interviews, it created a public space where people could share reports without being immediately mocked. The focus shifted. It wasn't just about whether visitors literally came from outer space, but about how these episodes affect people's lives, identities, and communities. Strieber moved from lone witness to advocate and community organizer. The foundation helped normalize talking about experiences many had kept secret and pushed for more serious attention from medicine and academia. Some praised it for offering community support. Others accused it of institutionalizing a disputed set of claims. Either way, it changed how these reports circulate. Cultural colonialism. Hypothesis, one of Strieber's most provocative interpretive moves, reframes the visitor's objectives not as a crude program of biological sampling, but as a subtler campaign to appropriate and reshape human meanings, rituals, and identities.
The second reason is deeper. It goes back to ontological shock, and it has to do with cultural colonization. When Europeans developed the ocean-capable sailing vessels, they sailed out across the world with superior technology, but not necessarily a superior culture. They destroyed numerous civilizations by relentlessly colonizing them culturally, theorizing that if aliens were to come here, they would keep themselves secret, because the only things they would want here were things that would be new to them. And as soon as they revealed themselves, we would refocus our entire culture toward them, and that would end it. And so if the second reason for the secrecy is that they want to learn from us things that are new to them.
In his vocabulary, the visitors are less like external biologists and more like cultural tourists with a mission. Why this frame, he asked. Why do so many reports center on intimate settings, reproductive images, symbolic gestures, and fragmentary, dreamlike communication? Why do the most persistent effects tend to be shifts in belief, priorities, and social ties rather than obvious physical artifacts? Cultural colonialism in his hands denotes interventions that aim to occupy the conceptual spaces where humans construct identity and social memory, by seeding motifs into dreams, by nudging rituals, and by leaving ambiguous communications that invite reinterpretation. The visitors might be reshaping the stories we tell about ourselves. It is a theory that makes the phenomenon less about biology and more about narrative power. It is also a deliciously unnerving thought. Imagine the visitors as terrible cultural tourists who rearrange your museum labels while you are asleep. Examples that make the cultural colonialism framing tempting include repeated attention to private and symbolic aspects of life, reports that center on reproductive images and rituals, the recurring appearance of certain motifs across different witnesses, and communications that arrive as metaphor or mythic fragment rather than clear propositional language. These patterns fit better with a claim about meaning-making than they do with a neat physical science model. Critics of the idea will say it is speculative and unfalsifiable. Supporters will say it captures a dimension that strictly biological frameworks miss. Either way, it foregrounds the role of narrative and cultural transmission in anomalous experience. Implications: if we take the cultural colonialism hypothesis seriously, it has consequences for how we study and respond to contact phenomena. Methodologically, researchers must move beyond a sole focus on physical traces and include qualitative analysis of narrative structure, comparative mythology, and media transmission. The archive of stories becomes data. Therapy must address trauma and memory, while also helping people reconstruct coherent life narratives. When their sense of self has been rattled, support looks less like forensic lab work and more like narrative repair. Socially, the hypothesis raises questions about vulnerability and institutional mediation. Who is most susceptible to influence? How do educational and religious institutions buffer or amplify cultural pressure? And what forms of cultural resilience can be developed? Philosophically, it forces us to revisit distinctions between human and non-human agency, to ask what counts as culture and who may participate in shaping it. The idea unsettles comfortable categories. It also opens intriguing avenues for interdisciplinary research. Continuing debate and legacy. For some, Strieber is a foundational figure who helped validate reporting and create spaces for community and healing. His willingness to speak candidly about fear, shame, and confusion opened doors for others. To skeptics and many scientists, he remains a controversial and disputed figure whose claims are better explained by sleep phenomena, fantasy, or social contagion. His cultural colonialism proposal is dismissed by some as imaginative but untestable storytelling. Despite the disagreements, his impact on how anomalous contact is discussed is undeniable. He nudged the conversation from a single question. Did they arrive to a richer set of questions about how extraordinary experiences get woven into narratives, identities, and cultures? Historians, anthropologists, and psychologists now find in his case a fruitful crossroads for study. Future writers and conspiracy memoirists will have him to thank or blame, depending on taste. But I personally believe in his story, but that's just my opinion. Conclusion: Whitley Strieber's 1985 encounter and the complex body of work that followed make for a story that resists tidy categorization. It is equal parts memoir, provocation, research prompt, and cultural mirror. Whether you read his reports as literal meetings with non-human intelligences, as windows into psychological and spiritual transformation, or as artifacts of cultural storytelling, they force us to reckon with how we interpret the strange, the traumatic, and the ineffable. His turn toward cultural colonialism reframes the phenomenon as less about biology and more about narrative influence, a move that complicates simple answers and invites interdisciplinary attention. So what do you think of Whitley's encounter? Was it a genuine intruder into human life, a neurocognitive glitch dressed in myth, or an early example of a story that learned how to remake our cultural furniture?
So for 5 days, a man was borrowed. The story that Travis Walton and 5 other witnesses told was so unbelievable, so unimaginable, that it has become the most famous case of UFO abduction ever reported.
Travis Walton was born February 10th, 1953, and spent most of his life in Snowflake, a small town with a name that sounds like a baked good but actually comes from the surnames of its founders, Erastus Snow and William Jordan Flake. Snowflake sits in northeastern Arizona, and until the mid-1970s, it was mostly known for ranches, forests, and people who could locate a lost calf better than a lost cell phone. Travis worked as a forestry hand, dating Dana, who happened to be the sister of his boss on that particular contract, Mike Rogers. Small towns breed small circles, and this crew of loggers were more than co-workers. They were friends, family by proximity, and people who spent long days shoulder to shoulder, battling undergrowth and bureaucratic deadlines. Mike Rogers was the veteran on the crew, a contractor with 9 years of experience with the United States Forest Service. The job in November 1975 was a big one, thinning scrub brush and undergrowth over a 1,200-plus acre section of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake. To catch up on the schedule, Mike put together a crew of 7 men. Himself, Travis Walton, Ken Peterson, John Gillette, Steve Pierce, Alan Dallas, and Dwayne Smith. They were the kind of crew that started at dawn, wrapped up at sunset, and knew how to make a bad pot of coffee taste like a triumph. Still, they were behind schedule, which made every extra minute in the field feel important, and every strange light in the woods feel like either a hazard or an omen. On the evening of November 5th, 1975, after a hard day's work, the crew piled into Mike's truck around 6 in the evening. As they drove away, they saw bright glimmers of light behind a hill and assumed there might be a fire. There was no smoke. As they got closer, they saw it in the trees.
The guys started seeing a light through the trees.
A metallic disc-shaped object hovering in a clearing, silver-colored, roughly 8 feet thick and about 20 feet across.
Travis!
Casting a glow that made the night look like a studio set. Travis, ever the curious type, jumped out of the truck despite his mates yelling at him to get back in. The disc made a turbine-like noise, and when it began to wobble, a blue-green beam of light shot out and struck Travis. Witnesses say the light threw him at least 10 feet and he landed unconscious. The men panicked and drove away, later claiming they saw the object lift up and head toward the horizon. When they returned to search, no Travis was found, only a forest that suddenly felt far less ordinary. Initial reports came in that night. Ken Peterson called the sheriff's office around 7:30 p.m., and Deputy Chuck Ellison met the shaken crew at a shopping center in Heber. The deputies heard a story that sounded like a script for late-night television, and yes, there was skepticism. Sheriff Marlon Gillespie arrived to hear the story in person. Some crew members were too distraught to return to the scene. Others insisted on tracking down their friend, perhaps hoping to find him cold but alive. The search grew with police, volunteers, and a general atmosphere equal parts worry and disbelief. Still, the forest offered no clues, no burn marks, no bloodstains, no torn clothing, nothing to account for how a man, apparently flung through the air by a shining light, could vanish without a trace. The same questions kept surfacing. Was it an accident, a murder, or had Travis simply become lost in the freezing night? Individual interviews with the 6 remaining crew members produced consistent, detailed descriptions of the object and the events leading up to Travis's disappearance. Their willingness to take lie detector tests suggested confidence in their accounts. On November 8th, 3 days after the incident, and with Travis still missing, P.S.Y. Gilson, a polygraph examiner from the Arizona Department of Public Safety, administered tests to the crew. The questions were straightforward. Did any of them harm Travis? Did they know where his body was buried? And were they telling the truth about seeing a UFO? 5 of the men passed the tests, while one, Alan Dallas, was unable to complete his test, rendering his result inconclusive. Gilson concluded that 5 of the 6 men were truthful, and his report indicated these men had not injured Travis nor concealed his body. That conclusion helped cement the official perception in some quarters that something more unexplained than a simple forest accident had occurred. Word spread fast, and Snowflake was soon flooded by reporters, ufologists, tourists, and skeptics, creating an impossible scene for forensic investigation. The town's marshal suggested it was a prank involving a balloon, while his wife dismissed the idea as implausible. The sheriff, having heard the polygraph results and the consistent testimonies, said he believed the crew's story. But public opinion split, as it often does when the extraordinary collides with the mundane. Some said it was a hoax designed for fame or money. Others whispered about deliberate hiding or a cover-up for a homicide. As theories proliferated, facts got messy under the weight of attention and rumor. Then, 5 days after his disappearance on November 11th, Travis returned. If you were following the tabloids back then, this is the moment the story jumped from local oddity to national obsession. Travis's initial condition was alarming. He was weak, thirsty, in pain, and having trouble breathing. He told a tale of waking up in a place that at first resembled a hospital, attended by 3 figures in orange jumpsuits. As his vision cleared, he realized these figures were not human. What followed was a detailed account of otherworldly beings in enclosed rooms that would make a set designer jealous. Travis described the beings as humanoid, but smaller than average, under 5 feet tall, with domed, hairless heads and disproportionately large brown eyes that contained almost no white. Their skin was soft and marshmallow-like. They had no eyelashes or eyebrows, and their delicate hands lacked nails. When Travis tried to push one away, it recoiled easily, springing back as if he had poked a soft doll.
Look like smooth, like they had no clear muscles.
Yeah, they were pretty smooth, very light. When I hit the one, it fell back into the other one pretty easily. Like he weighed hardly anything.
Like a little kid?
Yeah. That was the most terrifying experience of my life.
He said he was led into rooms that were spherical and dark, with star-like points of light projected on the ceiling, and that he later found himself in a hangar-sized chamber with craft that were apparently larger on the inside. He encountered tall figures wearing blue bodysuits and glassy helmets with bright gold-colored eyes, which sounds like a fashion choice straight from a vintage science fiction paperback. At some point, he found and waved a glass-like cylinder at the creatures as a makeshift weapon, and was led to a separate room where a woman-like figure placed an oxygen mask on his face. He later passed out. He awakened on a cold night at a gas station near Haber, Arizona, and watched as a disc hovered above the highway and then shot away. He had been gone for 5 days, but felt like only hours had passed. Family and friends were relieved, but the aftermath was chaotic. Scientists, journalists, ufologists, and anyone with a notepad descended upon Travis, offering theories, tests, and requests for interviews. The Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, known as APRO, stepped in to arrange medical examinations, financed in part by the National Enquirer, because truth and tabloid circulation have always had an awkward but profitable partnership. Medical tests showed no drugs in Travis's system, and he was generally healthy. Polygraph testing became a battleground. Travis initially disputed how one test was conducted, but he later passed 2 other polygraph tests.
Travis took a lie detector test after he supposedly reappeared, and he flunked it. And he flunked it very badly.
I was in too emotionally overwrought condition to take a test that soon after the incident. By the way, I did take one later, which was passed.
By a less experienced examiner while the boss was out of town.
Well,
the
so
boss
there were
came
two
back.
tests. There were 2 polygraph tests. You failed the first, which was shortly after the alleged incident, and you passed the second. Is that right?
But more than that.
The National Enquirer even awarded Travis and his co-workers $5,000 for what they called the best UFO case of the year. Whether that felt like recognition or a consolation prize in the court of public opinion depends on your appetite for sensationalism. Supporters found validation in polygraph results and witness consistency. Jim Ledwith, among others, argued that the multiple tests and corroborating testimonies pointed toward an actual unexplained encounter.
If they covered up the fact that he failed the first one. The APRO, a UFO group, had paid for it along with the National Enquirer, and when Travis didn't pass, they kept the whole thing secret. There was like a cover-up, Watergate style. You know, they deep-sixed the embarrassing evidence, and then they stonewalled it in public.
Skeptics were not convinced. Philip Klass, a well-known UFO critic, suggested the polygraphs were poorly administered and pointed out inconsistencies in the accounts, implying the possibility of deliberate fabrication for money or fame.
This Travis Walton story, and therefore this movie, is a hoax. He's here with us in Washington. He's saying, Phil, that all 7 of these people are lying.
I'm afraid we have to say that on the basis of physical evidence.
Meaning?
Physical evidence that should have been there, but was not. Now,
cognitive psychologist Susan Clancy offered a different explanation, proposing that Travis may have been influenced by media portrayals like the TV movie, the UFO incident, and the famous 1961 Hill abduction case, and that these cultural narratives could have shaped memory and storytelling. Debunkers argued motive, method, and inconsistencies. Believers argued the polygraphs, eyewitnesses, and lack of convicting proof to the contrary. Decades later, no definitive proof has settled the matter, and the debate continues in forums, books, and late-night documentaries. Travis went on to live a life that in some ways returned to the ordinary. He became a foreman at a lumber mill, started a family, and continued to stand by his story. Over the years, he reportedly submitted to 5 polygraph tests, while the entire crew underwent about 11 in total. For many, the Walton case became the poster child for alien abduction lore, a narrative studded with dramatic moments, testable claims, and ongoing controversy. Whether you view it as a genuine encounter, a cleverly staged hoax, or an episode shaped by cultural influences, it remains a story that captures the imagination. Travis later reflected that by stepping out of that truck he left behind more than just his 6 fellow workers. He left behind a normal life, and that the experience altered him forever. So what do you think? Did a beam of eerie blue-green light do the impossible? Or could a small-town play act a scenario that spiraled into international infamy? Are you team believer, team skeptic, or team prefer to keep your feet on the ground and your eyes cautiously upward?
The first episode to snag viewer attention focuses on the Pascagoula incident, a strange night in October 1973 when 2 fishermen claimed an encounter with non-human beings that sounded at once like the product of fevered imagination.
Curiosity about strange lights in the sky probably predates campfires, but modern fascination took on new urgency with the rise of space travel, Hollywood sci-fi. Pascagoula, Mississippi was the kind of place where a mysterious light would be noticed. In the early 1970s, the town was changing. A shipyard producing destroyers had injected jobs and modern noise into a once quiet fishing village. New faces came, including 2 men who would become central to an enduring story, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. They were ordinary blue-collar and fond of fishing. Those facts matter because they make a tale seem less Hollywood and more like small town. Life Interrupted, which is an appealing blend for anyone who likes a good, unsettling yarn. On the evening of October 11th, 1973, Charles and Calvin took to the Pascagoula River near a drawbridge, rod and bait in hand, like men who preferred predictable fish to unpredictable headlines. According to their accounts, the air carried a subtle electric buzz before anything visual registered. Charles later described a zipping sound about 60 to 70 feet away, and then a blinding, otherworldly light. The scenario escalated fast. A craft, as they described it, seemed to lower and reveal itself, and 3 entities emerged, floating in a manner that struck witnesses as odd because the beings did not touch the ground. 2 came for Charles, 1 for Calvin, and both men reported being paralyzed, unable to run, as if held by hypnosis. They say they were taken inside the craft, which they compared to being inside a light bulb, a description that prompts both curiosity and the mental image of a very bright interior design choice. Inside this vessel, Charles recounted, an apparatus resembling a large eye rose from the wall and examined him thoroughly. It is the kind of detail that makes skeptics roll their eyes and believers clutch their proverbial pearls with equal fervor. After a period that to them felt like a real experience, both men were returned to the shoreline where they found themselves disoriented and staring at a craft that departed in a flash of powerful blue light. The story reads like a chapter from a pulp magazine, yet it was filed as a real-world report, offered not with theatrical embellishment, but with the tremulous sincerity of 2 men who insisted they had witnessed something extraordinary. News of the incident spread faster than a dockside rumor. The fishermen went to the authorities, and soon the small town of Pascagoula had something to talk about besides shipyard schedules and fishing conditions. Local reaction ran the gamut from fearful curiosity to outright panic, with calls flooding the sheriff's department. National media joined the conversation, turning the pair into fixtures of nightly speculation. Some outlets gave the visitors a nickname that stuck, the Clawmen, which had the unfortunate effect of making the situation sound like a B-movie with a catchy trailer. For Charles and Calvin, however, there was nothing jaunty about it. Calvin, in particular, spoke of prolonged trauma, and their lives, they said, were never quite the same. When a story this odd hits the public sphere, witnesses and evidence become the currency of credibility. And here, the Pascagoula case got complicated. The The drawbridge near where the men were fishing was tended around the clock, and at the time, 2 bridge tenders were on duty with a clear view of the river. They reported seeing nothing. That absence of corroboration by those ideally located to notice is a big hole in the narrative, especially for those who like their mysteries accompanied by physical proof. Yet, other locals did come forward with reports of strange blue lights that evening. One man, leaving his car at dusk, described powerful LED-like lights on the riverbank. A woman in her backyard said she watched blue lights moving. These testimonies added texture, but they fell short of a photograph, a piece of wreckage, or any other hard evidence you can pin to a bulletin board. Questions about the men themselves compounded skepticism. Charles reportedly refused a polygraph test, a decision that prompted some observers to ask why. Critics also accused both men of profiting from media appearances and interviews, suggesting that financial incentive might have colored their recounting. Charles was alleged to have made significant earnings from the story, which inevitably fed the narrative that fame and money could be more motivating than truth. Supporters countered that any money was compensation for time lost and the stress of constant public scrutiny. Private tape recordings exist from when the men were alone, and those who had hoped to catch them contradicting themselves claimed the tapes showed consistent accounts, which complicates the argument either way. Skeptics have offered a variety of alternative explanations, because where a fantastical claim appears, rational alternatives will follow. One possibility is simple fabrication, a sensational story crafted for attention. Another is alcohol or a waking dream state, a not implausible suggestion when 2 men, at night and by the river, report an experience that could be consistent with hallucination. Given the Cold War context, an additional proposition is that the men witnessed a secret military experiment or aircraft that looked and behaved in ways unfamiliar to civilians. After all, military tests in the 1970s could have involved new lighting or hovering craft, and secrecy would have kept official channels quiet. The mixture of explanations reveals less about what happened and more about how human beings try to make sense of the inexplicable. As the decades passed, the Pascagoula episode settled into folklore. In 2019, a historical marker was unveiled near the alleged site, an odd blend of local pride and ongoing bewilderment. The plaque both acknowledges the incident and cements it in regional history, which pleased some and horrified others who worried about glorifying something unverified. Charles Hickson died in 2011, leaving behind a son who appears in contemporary reflections on the event. Calvin Parker sadly passed away in 2023. Ufologist Philip Mantle says he stuck to his story to the end. He often spoke about the trauma he lived with, praised his wife's support, and welcomed the historical marker as a kind of official recognition. For believers, it feels like vindication. For skeptics, it's just a town landmark with a dramatic backstory. Watching the Netflix episode and weighing the evidence is like assembling a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces were never printed. The documentary presents interviews, period footage, and contemporary reflections, but it cannot conjure the independent physical proof that would tilt the debate decisively. The presenters approach the story with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. They point out that the description of the craft and visitors bears uncanny resemblance to cinematic depictions from the era, which raises the possibility that popular culture shaped memory or expectation. They note discrepancies in Charles' definite accounts over time, and they wonder why, if a genuine government or law enforcement inquiry had taken place, there is not more public record of it. These are standard lines of inquiry for true crime and unexplained phenomena alike, and they lower the rhetorical temperature from breathless belief to measured doubt. Even so, the presenters confess a kind of hopeful bias, a shameless preference for the mysterious. This human tilt toward wonder is not purely sentimental. For many viewers, stories like Pascagoula are appealing because they challenge our sense of centrality in the universe. The idea that non-human beings might have visited and that ordinary people might have had direct contact is both terrifying and intoxicating. The presenters admit that despite the loopholes and unanswered questions, they wish the story were true. It is a small, honest admission that transforms a dispassionate review into something more conversational and human. So, where does that leave the Pascagoula incident in practical terms? It rests in that comfortable, infuriating middle ground between proven fact and delightful fiction. The The case has enough consistent testimony to avoid being dismissed without thought, but not enough physical evidence to be embraced unequivocally. It has cultural resonance, a place in local history, and a narrative that will continue to be retold whenever people enjoy the tension between mundane life and the possibility that something extraordinary might interrupt it. Whether those interruptions were misinterpreted aeronautical tests, alcoholic hallucinations, skillful performances, or genuine contact with visitors from beyond our planet is a question that fuels dinner table debates and internet comment threads alike. The honest verdict from a pragmatic perspective is cautious. The story is intriguing, and the memories of the two men involved add emotional weight. However, the lack of corroboration from the bridge tenders, the absence of physical proof, and the inconsistencies cited by critics justify skepticism. At the same time, a portion of the community and of broader popular culture will never let go of the hope that one night on the Pascagoula River, something truly extraordinary occurred. The presenters of files of the unexplained land in that ambivalent territory, acknowledging both the compelling human testimony and the legitimate reasons to doubt. In the end, stories like Pascagoula endure because they allow us to practice two contradictory virtues at once: skepticism and wonder. We can demand evidence, call for rigor, and mock unreasonable leaps, while still offering space to marvel at what might be just beyond our understanding. Whether you fall into the camp that thinks it was an elaborate hoax, a product of stress and circumstance, or a genuine brush with non-human beings, the tale is a good one, told by men who swore to their truth and by a town that chose to remember it with a plaque. If nothing else, it reminds us that even in a modern age of surveillance and quick information, some mysteries refuse to be reduced to tweets and press releases.
On the evening of November 11th, 1987, Ed Walters glanced out of his west-facing window and saw something that would make most people check twice, then call a relative, then call a relative's friend, and finally wonder if they had had too much coffee. What he saw was a light behaving in ways that ordinary lights do not. It threaded and bobbed behind the pine trees like a firefly that had read too many physics textbooks. Curiosity won out over caution, which is usually how interesting stories begin, and Ed stepped outside to get a closer look. There in the sky, not 10 feet above the treetops, but in a category all its own, hovered an object that refused to be filed under mundane. He dashed back into the house, grabbed his trusty Polaroid, the sort of camera a man uses at job sites when he wants proof that a hole has been dug or a wall has been painted, and came back out to document what words alone would not manage to describe. He snapped 5 photographs. That decision changed everything. The craft did not remain aloof. It climbed in the sky and settled directly above Ed, which would have been remarkable if not for the fact that it suddenly emitted a blue beam of light that wrapped around his body like a glowing scarf from the future. The beam induced an immediate, total paralysis. Ed could not move. His voice betrayed him. He tried to scream and discovered that sound had quietly deserted his throat. Communication arrived in a form that most people reserve for movie scenes and late-night campfire tales. Telepathic messages, calm and insistent, told him to relax and to stop fighting. He found himself levitating, lifted off the ground as if the world had decided gravity was negotiable that evening. The voice in his head shifted between male and female tones with the casual inconsistency of an old radio flicking between stations, and then the strangest symptom of all revealed itself: vivid hallucinations of dogs. That detail has a way of sticking with you. It is oddly specific and oddly human at the same time, as if whatever intelligence was speaking to him had a sense of humor about domesticated mammals. It faded. Ed collapsed back down to earth like someone who had briefly been in the wrong elevator. There were no witnesses at his home to vouch for his experience, which is a frustrating predicament for storytellers and reporters alike, but he at least had tangible evidence in the form of 5 Polaroids. The photos were as stubbornly silent as any photograph, but they were there. For a moment, Ed considered anonymously sending the images to the Gulf Breeze Sentinel, a local paper that had a reputation for being willing to look at oddities. He and his wife discussed the possibility and decided to hold off. The pictures remained tucked away, part proof and part secret, until a week later when an inexplicable nudge made him change his mind. On November 17th, he sent the photos to the Sentinel under the alias Mr. X. If cornered, he planned to say he was just a friend of Mr. X. On November 19th, the Sentinel published the story, Polaroids and all, and asked readers to come forward if they had any related sightings. Newspapers are curious things. They spread stories like peanut butter on toast. The story is unsurprising and did not stop at a single publication. 2 days after the Sentinel ran the photos, Ed reported a new development, a humming in his ear accompanied by a voice that, this time around, chose an unusual dialect. It spoke in what Ed described as an African language, a detail that rendered the encounter even more baffling. Compelled to investigate, he stepped outside, and there it was again. The craft returned. The telepathic voice toggled between reassurance and commands, even resorting to Spanish at one point to warn him that photography was forbidden. Those prohibitions did not deter Ed. He photographed the vessel again. He also claimed to hear a female voice discussing mundane logistics like tests and safety, almost like a technician explaining quality control. Ed, who had apparently not subscribed to passive compliance, loudly challenged the craft on the morality of abducting people. That is a reaction many of us can admire. We like when someone stands up, especially when the opposition is extraterrestrial. Public interest climbed another rung on November 25th, when 5 independent witnesses reported seeing an object in the sky that matched Ed's description. These were people unrelated to him, which adds a rare kind of corroboration to the tale. One of the sightings was logged as taking place 1 hour after Ed's levitation, which meant that whatever unfolded that night did not belong to him alone. Another witness said they had seen the craft on the very same night Ed first reported it, giving the story a breath of shared mystery. In the quiet of an East Bay sunset, Charlie Summerby and his wife, Doris, watched a circular object glide by. They described it as bluish-gray with glowing portholes, moving with a silence that felt unnatural.
Charlie Summerby and his wife, Doris, saw this object last November. Charlie, if you could tell us what you saw.
Well, it was right after the sunset over East Bay. We saw this circular object. It was bluish-gray in color and with light shining out through portholes. And the really amazing thing was, there was no sound.
The craft came close enough on the morning of November 11th, it drifted at treetop level within 400 feet of Charlie, while 2 military jets trailed it by a couple of miles. The object angled up, hovered briefly as if sizing up the pursuit, and then blasted vertically with a velocity that made the pursuing jets look dawdling. The picture emerging was not of a lone man experiencing sleepwalking illusions, but of a series of events seen by multiple people in regular neighborhoods, under regular skies. By December 2nd, the episodes took a darker and stranger route. Ed heard telepathic Spanish words about a baby being given bananas and about secrecy, a conversation that stitched together the ordinary and the peculiar like someone making a patchwork quilt. A UFO appeared at a distance and then, with impossible speed, repositioned itself right in front of him. That time, Ed went out armed with a camera in one hand and a shotgun in the other. Brave or reckless, it is hard to pass judgment at that point. He raised both hands, and the craft chose discretion over confrontation and withdrew, allowing him to take another photograph. His wife stepped outside just in time to see the craft shoot vertically and vanish. The night's oddities kept coming. At around 3:30 a.m., a nervous impulse prompted Ed to lift the cord of his blinds. There, on the other side of the glass, stood a small entity about 4 feet tall. Confrontation seemed like a reasonable choice for a man who had had little rest and had a gun on hand, so Ed ran outside, planning to physically intervene. But the same blue beam immobilized him once more. The beam later returned to retrieve the small being, which Ed described as boxy and carrying a silver rod. The image of a little figure with a metallic rod sounds like something from a childhood storybook rewritten by a mad scientist. The Sentinel later received a photograph from an anonymous source that dated back to June of 1986, a year before Ed's primary run of experiences. The sender, fearful of being dismissed as a teller of ghost stories, had kept the image quiet until now. This was not the only piece of strange material in play. On top of eyewitness accounts and Polaroids, a cardboard model of a spaceship surfaced in the wall of Ed's old house after new owners moved in. The model was carefully constructed with blue plastic film, an orange paper ring, a short plastic pipe, and a couple of paper rings, all taped together.
Generation UFO model.
Okay, can you get a shot of this on the monitor? Oh, you got it over there.
If you think this model looks anything like the photographs of what the people around Gulf Breeze are seeing, then you need to have some glasses.
Drafting paper windows covered 2/3 of its circumference. Scribbled measurements on the back happened to match the dimensions of a nearby house on Jamestown Drive, and the handwriting bore an odd resemblance to Walters' own script. For skeptics, this artifact is a red flag. For believers, it is a breadcrumb. For everyone else, it is an invitation to ask more questions than the average game of 20 questions usually produces. The Mutual UFO Network, better known as MUFON, took an interest in the Gulf Breeze events and launched an official inquiry on December 4th, 1987, which effectively moved the incident from local gossip into the sphere of organized investigation.
Daylight events have UFO researchers scrambling for an explanation.
We now are going through a series, it seems, of daylight sightings, and the nighttime sightings have almost completely diminished.
90% of all reported or recorded UFO sightings occur at night. Only 10% are seen during daytime hours and are rarely captured on tape or film. Along with the increase in daylight sightings has been an increase in the number of eyewitness reports.
The next day, Ed reported another face-to-face exchange with a craft that delivered a message in plain English, albeit unsettling. Do not resist. Stay where you are. You are in grave danger. We will not harm you. Zias, we have come for you. The odd capitalization and the finality of the word Zias made the message feel scripted, but the underlying emotional tone was clear. The craft was not offering small talk. Ed took another photo just before the craft fled. As December progressed, more witnesses came forward and more photos surfaced. One night, December 17th, Ed awoke to 3 dark figures in his room. He tried to defend himself, but a sharp headache stopped him cold. His wife corroborated the pain. The figures vanished, and Ed rushed to the window where he saw the UFO. He seized his camera and his shotgun and went out to document the craft, which now appeared to be experiencing mechanical trouble. By December 23rd, Ed witnessed 3 UFOs while tending to his pool filter. Anonymous submissions of photographs continued. An enigmatic figure known as Believer Bill sent images that closely resembled Walters' own shots, as if confirming that independent observers were noticing the same phenomena from different vantage points. The most famous photograph associated with Ed came on January 12, 1988. While on a construction site, he encountered a craft at close range and suffered yet another blast of light that left him in pain, but determined. Against all logic and with visible grit, he exited his truck and dragged his shotgun while managing to photograph the thing. According to his account, the craft released 5 blue beams and deposited small creatures onto the road, each holding glowing silver rods. Ed escaped, and the story did not stop there. The intensity of his encounters caused MUFON to station investigators near his home. For a week, 2 MUFON representatives, including Bob Reed, camped out in shifts, watching the skies with little to show for it beyond one airplane. To chase answers, Ed teamed with Dwayne Cook, the Sentinel's publisher, to track the craft.
And I said, you're not going to believe what we're getting ready to run in this week's paper. Showed them the pictures, and they looked at them and said, that's what we saw. So at that point, I more or less lost my fear of going with it because, you know, if your own folks see it, if you can't trust them, who can you trust?
As it turns out, at least a dozen other people saw the same thing that night, including Art Huffman.
It was not a private matter anymore. Local media, private investigators, and fringe enthusiasts had entered the narrative, making the Gulf Breeze events an odd mix of personal trauma and public spectacle. Ed's encounters, however, cannot be divorced from earlier experiences that paint a broader picture of his life. At age 17, he awoke to find an alien face hovering above him. He called his brother Bert, who suggested a more terrestrial explanation, perhaps the cat. Wet footprints leading from outside the room complicated that rationalization, though. Multiple tracks suggested comings and goings, and Ed's clothes were damp despite no apparent reason for them to be so. At 25, a light darted past his car and then encircled it, after which several hours of time vanished from his memory. At 33, he collided with a metallic object while canoeing. Things bubbled up from the water and he found himself miles down the shore with no memory of the interim. All of these incidents fit together like mismatched tiles in an oddly colored mosaic. On May 1st of an unremarked year, Ed went to Soundside Beach to confront the unknown. He heard a strange sound, took 2 photos with an SRS camera rig, noted a foul smell and black particles under his fingernails, and found bruises on his face while realizing an hour and 15 minutes were missing from his memory. He kept the black particles for analysis, evidence of his intention to treat the happenings scientifically. Skeptics will point out inconsistencies. Cardboard models and handwriting similarities suggest hoax potential. Polaroids are charmingly unreliable in a court of law. Memories that contain gaps and strange time losses invite psychological explanations, from sleep paralysis to misremembered dreams. The human mind is a storyteller by design, inclined to sew disparate events into narratives that satisfy our love of cause and meaning. Yet the Gulf Breeze saga resists being neatly categorized. Multiple witnesses, police reports, newspaper publication, and third-party investigations complicate the hoax hypothesis, while the details odd enough to seem fabricated often read instead like messy reality. A craft that glides silently with luminous portholes, a beam that immobilizes and levitates, telepathic voices switching genders, Mandarin moments in Spanish and African dialects, and small boxy beings with rods are not tidy details. They are messy and precise at the same time, like someone attempting to describe a dream immediately after waking.
Universe, and this house featured very prominently in that center. Sitting in his office, which was over there, he happened to notice out in the sky in this direction. Glowing object coming along. He took his first picture and the object had not quite cleared the tree. The left-hand side of the object was blocked by some of the branches of the tree. And then he took 4 more pictures that was in the clear, and this telephone transformer, this power transformer, lights there, that all shows up in the picture.
What do you think about the Gulf Breeze encounters involving Ed Walters? Let me know down in the comments. In 1980, Alan Godfrey, a steady-handed police constable whose days were normally filled with lost livestock, late-night noise complaints, and the agreeable monotony of paperwork, was patrolling Burnley Road. He was not expecting cosmic drama. He was expecting cows. Instead, he encountered something that would remap his schedule, his reputation, and the local folklore. At first glance, Alan thought a bus had come to rest in the middle of the road. That is a rational assumption in a world that generally prefers rational assumptions. The object before him refused to cooperate. It was a huge, white, dome-shaped craft, spinning on its axis and hovering about 5 feet above the tarmac. It glowed with an intensity that made the night feel embarrassed. It did not belong to any section of the highway code or indeed any parking regulations known to man. Alan's instinct as a policeman was to radio in and secure the scene. His radio was dead. His car refused to start. Then a blinding flash erased the world from his immediate memory. When he came to, he was 30 yards down the road and 20 minutes were missing from his morning. His watch had not caught anything useful. The road where the object had hovered looked as though someone had given the surface a gentle whisking. Dead leaves and twigs lay arranged in a perfect spiral, as if nature had briefly taken up a hobby in decorative arts. Alan was the kind of man who made notes and kept a tidy ledger. Missing time, a spiral on the road, and a powerless radio do not fit comfortably in neat logbooks.
I realised that this was a metallic, man-made craft. It was a nuts and bolts thing. It wasn't an hallucination, it was real. This object was 20 foot wide. It's 14 feet high. It's diamond shaped. The bottom half of it was rotating, the top half was stationary. It had a bank of dark windows, or could have been panelling. If I got out the car, picked a brick up, and thrown it at it, I'd have probably found out whether the windows or not.
Month, Alan chose to undergo hypnotic regression to fill in the gaps. Hypnosis for him was a way to ask his own mind to hand over any receipts it might have stashed away.
There's a light coming from underneath. I'm getting back into the car. I'm going.
This unique video footage is of Police Constable Alan Godfrey in a state of hypnotic trance.
There's a light. Shining a light.
Doctors are attempting to recover 40 minutes from Alan's consciousness, lost on a cold night in November 1980.
Under regression, Alan remembered waking up inside a craft. He recalled being examined in a clinical manner by 8 small beings and 1 taller humanoid. He described instruments, lights, and a procedure that felt like being part of a medical audit with poor signage. The details matched some of the physical oddities he carried home: an itchy red mark on his foot, a split in his boot, and the nagging sense that time had been politely borrowed.
Then I wake up in a room. Now in this room, there is a very tall humanoid, probably the better word. He's about 6 foot to 6'6", very tall, thin, with a beard. He had a skull cap on and he had this white gown on. What happens then is I'm asked to get on this bed. Now, the questions asked to me then is, how did he, he wants to get out? Because I saw his mouth's not moving, he's not talking, it's just, he wants me to get on the bed. Obviously, whatever it was having some sort of influence over my thoughts. Yet I did feel at ease with him. I felt comfortable with him. I got the impression that I'd met him before. I wasn't in fear of him or anything like that. I didn't feel in any danger. So I'm on the bed, and then these horrible little things come. They are a lampshade, like dark eyes. That's the best way I can describe them. And there was about 7 or 8 of them.
The town that hosted these events was not untouched by another mystery that year. Earlier, a miner named Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing after leaving home to buy groceries. 5 days later, his body was found 20 meters from his house, lying on a pile of coal. He wore a suit with no shirt. His hair had been roughly cropped, his watch and wallet were absent, and his clothes were improperly fastened. There were strange burn marks on his head, neck, and shoulders. An unidentifiable ointment smeared on the burns baffled scientists. Although Zygmunt had been missing for 5 days, his beard suggested he had been absent only a day.
I sort of instinctively told you there's something not right. You come across dead bodies all the time, it sounds like what you do. He was lying on his back, just staring up into the sky.
There are no signs of footprints around the body. And he looks as though he's been hastily dressed by someone else.
Where's his shirt gone?
Stranger still, burn marks are found on the body's head and neck.
It looked like somebody had stuck electrodes on him.
Some of the burns seem to have been treated. A sample of the green ointment covering the burns is sent away for forensic analysis. Alan and Malcolm are stunned by the results.
Whether the forensic science laboratory said it was no substance known to man.
Alan had been among the first officers on the scene when Zygmunt's body was discovered. The coincidence of 2 bizarre events in the same area within months of each other invited tidy, dramatic explanations and messy, stubborn doubts in equal measure. People are fond of neat narratives. If unusual things occur near each other, someone will stitch them into a single tapestry, whether the threads belong together or not. For Todd Moran, the pattern was irresistible. Word spread quickly. A bus driver claimed he had seen something in the aftermath. Nearby officers reported a still blue light. Witnesses from the story crawled into national news, into late-night conversations, and into the dark corners of public suspicion. Todd Moran acquired a new nickname. UFO Alley sounded like an eccentric tourist trap. It sounded like a place that might hand out fridge magnets shaped like spirals. Alan's life, which had once been a steady sequence of predictable routines, now included interviews, documentaries, and the kind of attention that introduces you to the unhelpful cousin of curiosity called ridicule. Ridicule arrived precisely on schedule. People are efficient with their judgments. Colleagues whispered, the press speculated, and the machinery of officialdom hummed with polite concern. There were whispers about Alan being pressured to retire early, about transfers to distant stations, and about attempts to have him sectioned. Men in black entered the gossip as if they were props in a Gothic farce. Whether these elements were bureaucratic clumsiness, genuine concern for mental health, or deliberate attempts to quiet a troublesome narrative, they compounded the stress on a man whose primary competence had been to keep order on local streets. Despite the pressure, Alan remained insistent that he had seen something real. He described the craft as a diamond-shaped vehicle, 20 feet high and 14 feet wide, hovering and spinning slowly while creating that strange vortex on the road. He swore he had never seen anything like it before, and suggested with characteristic Yorkshire directness that he would be happy to swear on the Bible that what he saw was genuine. For a man who had spent his life consulting rule books and making sensible calls, the public spectacle was a pain and, at times, a genuine hazard to family privacy. His children learned early that having a father who is a policeman is complicated when that father is also a headline. There were small ironies along the way. After the hypnotic sessions, the story offered an odd consolation. Alan and his wife discovered a sudden change in their private life. The night after an intense flash of light, the couple were intimate, and soon after his wife reported a pregnancy. Life, it seemed, was capable of delivering unexpected bonuses even in the middle of a profoundly unsettling episode. Alan joked privately to friends that if such encounters had a fertility clause, it would make the universe a very cheeky landlord. Researchers and hobbyists descended upon the area. Some came with clipboards and sober intent. Others came with cameras, fervor, and slightly less skeptical haircuts. Photographer Rick Moran later uncovered further witnesses and local anecdotes during his investigations. A bookstore owner recalled sightings earlier in the year. Replacements to the tarmac near the original scene were mentioned. The local UFO club gained members. Todd Moran evolved a reputation that pulled in the curious, the investigative, and the conspiratorially minded. If the town could have sold tickets, it might have flogged them with the cheerful slogan, "Come for the spirals, stay for the speculation." In the wider world, attitudes toward strange aerial phenomena slowly shifted. Military and defense bodies started to admit that they had footage and reports of objects that behaved in ways not fully explained by current understanding of physics. Former officials and intelligence figures conceded that some encounters defied easy categorization.
So the idea of people alleging to be abducted by aliens, this is nothing new.
No, these reports go back decades, and I think it's one thing to say that you have seen a UFO because we know statistically that most UFO sightings are misidentifications.
These acknowledgments did not convert everyone, but they offered validation to those who had long felt dismissed. For Alan, such admissions were not proof of any particular theory. They were confirmation that the universe still contained corners where the light behaved oddly. Alan's story is not purely one of cosmic oddity. It is also a tale of human reaction. He experienced the absurdity of becoming a reluctant public figure. He faced skepticism, supportive colleagues, and the strange loneliness of someone who had a memory others could not share. He retained a dry sense of humor through it all. He could still laugh at the idea of a parking ticket from a craft that did not accept coin. He retained the instincts of a policeman. Record the facts, protect the scene, and always keep a pen handy. The accounts connected to Alan's experience raised questions that have never been fully answered. What was the origin of the unknown ointment on Zygmunt's burns? Where had Zygmunt been during those missing days? Who or what had left the spiral in the road? These questions do not fit neatly onto evidence forms. They live in reports, in late-night conversations, and in the lives of people whose ordinary routines were interrupted by the extraordinary. Todd Moran today carries its lore like a curious badge. Some visitors treat it as a quirky stop on a countryside itinerary. Others come with urgent seriousness in their eyes. The locals have learned to live with both. For Alan, time has softened some of the public glare and left a residue of quiet conviction. He remained adamant that he had witnessed something out of the ordinary and that the experience was not a trick of the mind. He has kept his privacy at times and spoken publicly at others, always with the measured tone of someone who once took notes on accidents and domestic disturbances, and who now had to account for a night that did not belong on any standard incident form. If Todd Moran can be said to have a moral, it might be this: the universe is larger than any single ledger. Strange things happen in ordinary places. People respond with curiosity, with derision, with compassion, and with the insistence that some experiences deserve more than a shrug. Alan's life was transformed by a night that began with a job to do and ended with a mystery that refused to be filed away. Jenny Randles approaches this material with a discipline that is almost forensic. Her book, The Truth Behind the Men in Black, reads less like sensationalism and more like a slow, relentless gathering of facts that will not be massaged into a tidy conclusion.
The particular photograph here is classic of the way in which UFO photographs appear all over the world and in newspapers and books about spaceships, because that looks like a spaceship. It's got a marking underneath, which seems to be some kind of strange alien language.
She interviews witnesses, pursues official lines of inquiry, checks records and timetables, and waits patiently for the small contradictions that reveal themselves only when someone takes the trouble to look. The episode that follows, set in the English Midlands in 1971, moves from the ordinary into the uncanny through precisely this kind of patient work. What begins as an unremarkable sighting of a white light in the sky becomes a sequence of events that strains the limits of explanation. Personal visits by men in immaculate dark suits, an offered official explanation that collapses under scrutiny, and a disappearance so absolute that it resists the vocabulary of police reports. This is the alleged true story of when UK police attempted to arrest the infamous Men in Black.
There, above the trees. Take the lad down to the field. Let's have a look.
Evening, fellas. Can we have a word?
You shouldn't have come.
Sighting itself was almost mundane. Jim Wilson, an ordinary man living in a busy town, looked up one late summer night and noticed a white light moving across the sky.
So Jim Wilson didn't mistake a satellite.
He saw something else.
For most people, this would be the sort of small incident to mention in passing the next morning and then forget. For Jim, it lodged in his mind long enough that someone came to his house a few days later. The visitors were impeccably presented. Dark suits, cut with strict lines, polished shoes, neat hair. Their manner was clipped, efficient, the kind of civility learned in offices where form is authority. They produced identity cards and claimed to represent the Ministry of Defense.
The light you saw the other night, that was Cosmos 408, a Soviet satellite.
They listened to Jim describe what he had seen and then offered an explanation that was at once tidy and final. The white light, they said, was Cosmos 408, a Soviet satellite.
All right. In October 1971, Soviet satellite Cosmos 408 passed over Canada at 23:16 Coordinated Universal Time.
In other words, they performed the social act of closure in a way that made it difficult for Jim to insist otherwise. On its face, the explanation might have been persuasive. A light crossing the sky can resemble a satellite. To the casual observer, that is a plausible answer. What undermined the account, however, was not any single dramatic contradiction, but a cluster of small, verifiable facts. Randall's followed those threads. She spoke to Ralph Noyes, who at the time was responsible for the MOD unit that handled UFO reports.
Satellite logs place Cosmos 408 over Canada at the same time.
February 7th, 71. Disc shape over the Cumbrian range. Witnesses consistent. Radar inconclusive. They dismiss what they can't explain, but the patterns are there.
Noise was plain and unequivocal. No one had been sent to Jimstown. Randall's colleague Derek James took a different tack and checked satellite logs at Farnborough. The data placed Cosmos 408 over Canada at the time Jim had seen the light, not over England.
Cosmos 408 was over Canada. Wilson couldn't have seen it from the UK.
Neatness of the men's story began to look performative, like prop work for a play.
Blue-white welding light, 3 portholes, no markings.
Matches Wilson's report to the letter.
And the silence, like it was breathing, not flying.
Which means it's not ours.
These details are easily overlooked if one is inclined toward a dramatic narrative. They matter because they reframe the scene. Why would anyone bother to stage a house call if a letter would have sufficed? Why send 2 men in polished suits to deliver a bureaucratic explanation that could have been conveyed by ordinary mail? The implication is not simply that the men lied. It is that the visit served a purpose beyond information transfer. The act of appearing at the door, the measured tone, the authority embodied in the card and the clothes all functioned to quiet the witness in a way that an anonymous correspondence would not have achieved. When upon inspection, the credentials proved unverifiable, the visitor's authority collapsed, and the encounter itself acquired a new gravity. The story did not end with the discredited explanation. The men returned, this time with a more persistent presence.
Clock's running.
It always is. You certain about him?
Certain enough to move tonight.
Then we move. Keep your hat low.
A black Jaguar began to park outside Jim Wilson's house night after night. At first, the police treated the situation as a standard complaint. They recorded the registration markings, took statements, and translated confusion into the ordinary instruments of bureaucracy. That is an important point. The routine procedures of policing are designed to absorb anomalies. A strange car parked outside a home is an irritation to be logged and, in most cases, explained away. The officers did what officers do best. They turned observation into paperwork in the hope that the files would yield a normal explanation. The files yielded instead an absence. When the registration was checked, there was no record corresponding to the number noted. The car, according to the records the officers consulted, did not exist. That blank in a ledger or database is not merely administrative. It is a disruption of expectation. When systems that are built to account for ordinary activity present absolute silence where one expects information, the situation graduates from odd to urgent. On the night of October 21st, 2 officers were ordered to approach the Jaguar. They worked in pairs, trained to minimize risk by taking positions at either side of a suspicious vehicle. They did what they had been trained to do. They approached quietly, flashlights low, hands near radio, and cuffs. Their movements were mechanical and professional because that is what their job required. What followed was not a confrontation or a chase. In the space of a heartbeat, the Jaguar and its 2 occupants vanished.
Step out of the vehicle, please.
Your approach is not required.
Control, we're gonna need.
Gone.
How are we meant to write this up, Tommy? There's nothing in the log that makes sense.
We stick to the facts. Time, location, witness statements. Say what we saw, don't speculate. Give the dispatch the reference and file it.
And if they don't believe it?
There was no engine revving, no wheels spinning, no flight down an alley. One instant, the presence occupied a stretch of curb. The next, it did not. In the silence and the shock that followed, the officers conducted a careful search and reported what they had seen as best they could. The language they used was cautious. The institutional need to file plausible accounts meant that certain ways of describing the event would not be recorded. A note could be made that the car had left or that the suspects had fled, but writing that an occupied vehicle had simply ceased to exist presented an evidential problem too large for the accepted forms of paperwork. Randles does not leap to metaphysical claims. She documents denials from officials who should know. She traces satellite positions and cross-references testimony, and she records the bureaucratic awkwardness that follows an event that does not fit established categories. If the men were impersonators, their timing and confidence were extraordinary. If they were agents of some official body, why the unnecessary drama and the subsequent denial? If neither explanation fits, then we confront a possibility that is harder to articulate. Phenomena that do not respect our ordinary divisions of space and presence. Episodes that might be described as paraphysical or interdimensional. Across her work, Randles draws attention to other features that complicate easy dismissal. Witnesses are sometimes described as being known to the visitors in ways that go beyond an awareness of their UFO reports. Strangers present detailed personal information that would be difficult to obtain through simple surveillance. Apparitions appear and disappear with a casual efficiency that excludes conventional trickery. These recurring patterns are not anecdotes piled for effect. They are data, and when taken together, they demand a different approach to explanation, one that allows for either a level of impersonation and deception operating with unusual resources and timing, or for phenomena that intersect with ordinary life in ways we do not yet comprehend.
Good afternoon. I wish to inform the country that through the diligence of our police and security services, 2 individuals believed to be agents of the so-called Men in Black have been taken.
The broader implications are not merely theoretical exercises. If the events documented by Randles point toward actors capable of manufacturing an uncanny theater of authority, then we confront a moral question about how such power is used and who is protected from it. Randles is careful to keep the record as clean as possible. She cites sources, notes investigative steps taken, and describes the limits of verification. She neither sensationalizes nor trivializes. Her method is to place each fact in relation to others, to let the incongruities accumulate until the weight of them demands attention. The Jim Wilson case is exemplary in this regard. Each small contradiction, whatever one's inclination, Randles' approach is salutary, slow, exacting, and unwilling to trade mystery for myth. She does not fabricate certainty where none exists. she offers instead a mapped field of anomalies that resist closure, and she invites the reader to consider what it might mean if the world is stranger than we habitually assume. If you are listening to this late at night, alone with the lights turned down low, that is exactly how this story should be heard. What happened in rural Alabama in 1973 did not arrive with fireworks or a dramatic announcement. It did not explode into view. It appeared quietly, it stood motionless, and then it left. It walked away, leaving behind photographs, unanswered questions, and a lingering unease that has not faded in more than 50 years. This is the account of the Falkville Metal Man, one of the strangest humanoid encounters recorded in the United States. The figure looked less like an animal and less like a conventional human being, resembling instead something constructed, something that did not belong to the natural world as we understand it. A small town, a quiet night. On October 17, 1973, Falkville, Alabama was a small town the way small towns used to be, quiet and rural, a place where most people knew their neighbors and nothing very out of the ordinary ever happened.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name.
It was the kind of place that felt distant from the ceaseless noise of larger cities, where life moved at a slower pace, and the night was a blanket rather than a stage. That is why, when a local police chief received a report of a strange figure walking along Highway 33, it felt all the more surreal to those who heard it. Jeff Greenhall was the town police chief. He took the call, gathered his camera, and drove out to investigate. He was doing what any responsible officer would do when someone reported a potential hazard along a rural road. He did not know then that a single decision would change his life and that of the community around him.
Oh, thank God. Officer, it just came down out by Old Miller Road. Big as a house, lights everywhere. Please, you gotta go.
Slow down, ma'am. What are you seeing?
I don't know. It's not a plane.
Stay put. Keep your lights off.
The figure at the roadside, as Greenhall drove down the dark highway, his headlights swept across the shoulders and trees. Suddenly, his lights fell on a figure standing just off the road.
Hey there. You all right?
First glance, it looked like a man. On second glance, it did not. The shape was humanoid and roughly the size of an adult human male, but its posture and stillness were wrong. It stood rigidly, unnaturally immobile, as if waiting. The surface of its body reflected the car headlights in a dull, metallic way. It was not shiny like polished chrome, but more like brushed metal, industrial in appearance. Greenhall later described the figure as wearing a metallic suit, seamless and tight with no visible zippers, buttons, or seams. There was no breathing apparatus, no exposed skin. The suit fit so closely that it suggested the figure was encased rather than clothed. And above the suit, there was a head, but it did not look like a human face. A face without features. Where human faces have eyes, a nose, and a mouth, this face offered darkness and reflective planes. Eye sockets were replaced by flat, black reflective areas. There was no mouth, no nostrils, no expression. The head was smooth and metallic, suggesting a face without actually having one. It resembled a manufactured helmet of some unknown purpose, not something created to conceal a human layer beneath. It was not a Halloween mask or a theatrical prop. The impression was of something purpose-built. Greenhall raised his camera and took photographs, several of them, as the figure remained still and unresponsive. There was no flinching, no attempt to hide, no reaction to the warning presence of headlights and a patrol car. Then, without any apparent cue, the figure began to move. A walk that did not match a human pattern. The metal man turned and walked away from the road into the line of trees. Its gait was stiff and mechanical, with a regularity to the steps that suggested artificial control rather than organic movement. It was not jerky or broken, not the motion of a malfunctioning machine, but it was not fluid either. It moved as though it had learned human locomotion by studying people from a distance, imitating the steps, but missing subtle, natural qualities. Greenhall followed briefly in his car, but the figure disappeared into the wooded area, leaving no sound of crashing brush and no broken branches.
Almost got you. Come on, move! Move! No! Ah, you're kidding me!
seemed to be absorbed by the dark, as if the night had accepted it. There was no chase, no dramatic confrontation, and no clear resolution. The metal man simply walked away, leaving a single witness who had photographs and a memory that would not let him go. Photographs that changed everything. What distinguishes the Falkville encounter from many other reports of strange humanoids is that Greenhaw took photographs. When the film was developed, the images matched his description. The photos were grainy in the manner of early 1970s film, but clear enough to show a reflective, humanoid figure standing at the roadside. The figure appeared seamless and unnatural, as the witness had claimed. Skeptics immediately suggested a hoax, that someone had donned a metallic costume to pull a prank, or that Greenhaw himself staged the photographs for attention. But many questions remained. If it had been a person in costume, why would they stand perfectly still by a rural road at night and then walk into the woods and never be seen again? No costume of the kind described was ever found, and no one came forward to confess. The suit appeared seamless in a way difficult to replicate with 1970s materials, and there was no indication of breathing apparatus, skin, or internal structure consistent with a human wearing a suit. Consequences for the witness. When the story reached the media, Greenhaw did not find support. Instead, he encountered ridicule, intense questioning, and pressure that eventually affected his career. Officially, the reasons given for his dismissal as police chief were unrelated to the encounter. Unofficially, the timing suggested a connection. In a small town, mysteries can be unwelcome, and social and professional consequences can follow those who attract unwanted attention. Greenhaw never recanted his claim. He stood by his testimony for years, maintaining that he had seen something real and that the photographs were genuine. Despite ridicule and professional setbacks, his account endured, and the photographs circulated among researchers and enthusiasts of unexplained phenomena, theories that struggle to fit. Over the decades, the Falkville metal man has invited a range of explanations, yet none fits comfortably. Some have speculated it was an experimental suit developed by a government agency such as NASA or a military contractor. There are strong arguments against this idea, including the lack of documentation, the improbability of testing such a suit by sending an individual to wander a public highway at night, and the unusual design that does not match known prototypes from that era. Other theories suggest a person in a costume, perhaps as a prank or publicity stunt. Yet no matching costume surfaced, no witness admitted to participation, and the behavior of the figure, standing motionless, then moving into the woods without noise, does not align well with human limitations. The materials and seamless appearance do not correspond to common costume construction techniques available in the early 1970s. A third idea is that the figure was a robot or a mechanical probe. This too is problematic. There is no documentation of such technology being left in rural Alabama without follow-up. A mechanical entity would likely have been noisy, created visible wear on the foliage as it moved, and left traces, all of which were absent. Some researchers turned to more speculative explanations. Perhaps the figure was a probe or scout sent ahead of something larger. Perhaps it was interdimensional in nature, a brief intrusion from another reality. Those ideas cannot be proven or disproven with the available evidence, but they reflect the discomfort felt by many who study the case because the figure does not conform to familiar categories. A case without drama, but with presence. What makes the Falkville metal man especially unsettling is not violence or spectacle, but presence. It stood there, unremarkable and yet out of place, silent and watchful. It gave no message, offered no threat, and left no trace beyond photographs and a single human memory. This lack of drama deepens the mystery because it raises questions without answers. Why was it there? What was it looking for? Was it observing human activity or scanning the environment for something else entirely? The story has a quiet, persistent quality that is hard to explain away. Many sightings and encounters fit into a pattern of dramatic events or repeatable phenomena. The metal man appears to be a one-off, a single brief occurrence that has no obvious motive and no follow-up. That alone unsettles investigators and the public because it suggests a capacity for stealth, for appearing and disappearing from common view without being tracked or cataloged. What we still do not know. Despite the passage of decades, several essentials remain uncertain. There is no definitive explanation for the metallic appearance and the seamless suit, and no identification of materials or construction. The lack of physical traces in the wooded area where the figure walked into the trees is puzzling. There are no convincing records of a person who could have produced such a costume and staged the event for publicity. There is no credible evidence of a machine or prototype that matches the figure in design or behavior. There is one irrefutable fact, however. On a quiet autumn night in 1973, an individual who was a law enforcement officer saw something that did not match ordinary experience. He took photographs. He told others what he saw. He accepted consequences rather than recant. Those elements alone make the case noteworthy to anyone interested in unexplained phenomena, and they have kept the story alive. Why it still matters. The Falkville encounter matters because it challenges our assumptions about what we know and what we can explain. Some cases of unusual sightings result in clear evidence that can be validated or debunked. This case resists both validation and debunking, leaving a gap in understanding that encourages curiosity and caution in equal measure. It reminds us that not every unexplained occurrence resolves neatly into existing categories. Sometimes an event remains a puzzle, and the puzzle itself is the point. It also matters on a human level. The encounter changed a man's life. It left him exposed to ridicule and professional setbacks. It left a town with a small but stubborn mystery. It serves as a measure of how communities react when confronted by something outside their normal experience. And it shows how witnesses of unusual phenomena are often treated by others, even when they stand by their observations. Possible paths. Forward. Resolving the Falkville mystery fully would likely require new evidence, or perhaps the discovery of records or testimony that have not yet come to light. Advances in materials analysis and the preservation of historical documents could offer fresh angles if any physical artifacts or archival materials are found. Oral histories and local memory sometimes reveal overlooked details decades later. Researchers who continue to examine the case look for corroborating accounts, additional photographs, or documentation that might explain the figure as a known technology or an elaborate hoax. Until such evidence appears, the case remains open, and the photographs and testimony continue to be studied by both skeptics and those inclined to believe in unexplained phenomena. A final thought for night drivers. In the end, the Metal Man's legacy is simple and unsettling. It tells us that the world may hold quiet mysteries, things that pass through our nights without fanfare and without immediate reason. It reminds us that absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence, and that some encounters leave only questions and an image on film. The Metal Man did not threaten, did not announce itself, and did not stay. It walked away and left a scene that looked normal again, except for the memory and the pictures. So the next time you are driving alone at night on a quiet stretch of road with trees closing in on both sides, take a second look at the shadows. Be aware, but not alarmed. If you see something standing there, motionless and reflective, do not assume it is human. Remember the Falkville Metal Man and the way it moved through a small town's night.
The Betty and Barney Hill encounter. A measured review of one of the most discussed close encounters in modern times. In the early 1960s, when space travel was new enough to seem almost theatrical and the public was learning to separate science fact from science fiction, an ordinary married couple from New Hampshire reported an extraordinary experience. Betty and Barney Hill lived in Portsmouth. Betty worked as a social worker, and Barney was a postal employee. Neighbors and friends described them as sober, reliable, and level-headed. They were not publicity seekers. Those facts matter because they shaped how the public and investigators reacted to their account, and why the story kept its place in the conversation for decades. On the night of September 19, 1961, the Hills were driving south after a vacation in Canada, having visited places such as Niagara Falls and Montreal. The trip home led them through the quiet roads of rural New Hampshire and into the White Mountains. It was late and the sky was clear. While Barney was driving, Betty noticed a bright light moving across the sky.
It's a beautiful night, isn't it?
Sure is, just feels different out here.
Different how?
Listen.
At first, she thought it might be a star or an airplane.
You see that?
I see it.
It's moving too smooth for a plane.
Hold on, let me get it in the glasses. It's changing directions.
Keep watching it.
But the light behaved oddly. It changed brightness and direction in ways that did not match normal aircraft or visible planets. As they drove, the light seemed to follow their car. At times, it appeared to grow larger and closer. Barney was skeptical at first, which is useful when you are being followed by a suspiciously bright object.
It's not a star, it's a ship. Smooth metal all around and those lights circling it. Windows, there are shapes in there, watching us. It's dropping into the clearing. Remember this, every detail.
Nevertheless, he began to pay attention. They stopped several times and used binoculars to get a better look. In their later accounts, the object looked like a flattened, disc-shaped vehicle with rows of openings that might be windows or panels. It moved silently and appeared to alter course quickly and precisely. This unexpected movement heightened the couple's concern. At one point, the object descended closer to the road near an area called Indian Head. Barney got out of the car and observed it through binoculars. He described seeing small figures inside. He returned to the car, visibly shaken. The pair then felt intense fear and urgency, and they drove away as quickly as the roads permitted. After that, the story takes on one of its most puzzling elements. The Hills recalled hearing beeping or buzzing noises. Soon afterward, both said their memory of the remainder of the drive became hazy. When they reached home, they discovered that more time had passed than they expected.
You okay?
I think so. Feels strange.
Yeah. Let's just get home.
Passed than they expected. The trip had taken nearly 2 hours longer than it should have. They also noticed physical details that seemed out of place, such as scuffed shoes, torn clothing, and watches that had stopped working. These anomalies added to their distress. Over the following days and weeks, both Betty and Barney experienced anxiety and disturbed sleep. Betty began to report vivid dreams in which she was taken into a bright space and examined by small, grayish beings with large eyes. Her dreams were unusually detailed and emotionally charged. Barney experienced stomach pain, trouble sleeping, and growing stress, although his memories initially were less complete than Betty's. Worried about their mental health, the Hills sought medical help. They were referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist well regarded in his field. Dr. Simon used hypnosis as a clinical technique to explore the roots of their anxiety.
We saw something in the sky, something we can't explain. It felt like time just vanished.
Let's explore what happened together.
I will hypnotize you now. Watch the watch, and don't be afraid.
In that era, hypnosis was commonly used to help patients recover memories and process traumatic experiences, especially for people whose symptoms suggested repressed or unclear events. Under hypnosis, the couple provided separate accounts that shared many notable similarities. Both described being taken from their car into a craft by small humanoid figures with large eyes and gray skin. They recalled examinations that involved lights and instruments and felt intrusive but not overtly violent.
Betty,
I'm all right.
step through. It is safe.
Please take a seat and don't be afraid.
All right.
We're okay.
Betty reported that one of the figures presented a map of stars, which she later drew from memory while still under hypnotic suggestion.
This is where we come from. A twin sun system on the edge of your Orion arm. We call it Zeta Reticuli. Our world circles these stars here.
The drawing showed connected points that some researchers later tried to match to images from books and films. Others noted that the Hill narrative contained elements familiar from popular science fiction of the time. Yet supporters of the Hills pointed out that they did not seek to profit from their story, that they appeared genuinely upset, and that they remained consistent in their accounts over the years. Those contrasting reactions helped to keep the case in public discussion. A particularly intriguing piece of evidence in the case is the star map Betty produced. Years later, an amateur astronomer, Marjorie Fish, tried to interpret the drawing by mapping the pattern to actual star systems. Fish suggested that the map could correspond to stars in the Zeta Reticuli area when viewed from a different perspective. Her method involved rearranging the pattern in three-dimensional space and comparing distances between stars. The proposed match generated both interest and controversy. Some researchers saw it as suggestive, while others pointed to uncertainties and the subjective nature of pattern matching. The Hills' social context is another important aspect to consider. They were an interracial couple during a period when such marriages were uncommon and often subject to prejudice. That reality meant the couple already faced social scrutiny and potential hostility. Friends and colleagues described them as sincere and thoughtful. Barney was especially concerned about his job and reputation. Given those pressures, many observers found it unlikely that they would fabricate a sensational story for attention. Over time, the Hills tried to resume ordinary life. They did not pursue fame aggressively, though they did speak publicly at times after their case received attention. Barney died in 1969. Betty lived until 2004. Both remained convinced that what they had experienced was real. Their persistence kept the narrative alive and encouraged new generations of researchers and commentators to revisit the case. The Hill encounter influenced how later reports were framed. Concepts such as gaps in remembered time, intrusive medical examinations, and telepathic-style communication began to show up in other accounts. Those patterns raised a key question for researchers. Do these similarities point to an underlying phenomenon that is consistent across different witnesses, or do they reflect shared cultural motifs that can shape how people describe unusual experiences? The answer remains contested, and the debate is part of what keeps the Hill case relevant. From an educational standpoint, the story has several useful functions. It prompts questions about how memory works and how people perceive unfamiliar events under stress. It invites careful study of clinical methods such as hypnosis, including their strengths and limitations for recovering memory. It encourages historians to examine how early space-age anxieties, popular media, and social attitudes shaped public reactions to reports of unexplained aerial phenomena. It also shows how a single, well-documented case can become a focal point for interdisciplinary study. Researchers continue to examine the Hills account from multiple angles. Psychologists study the role of dreaming, trauma, and suggestion. Cognitive scientists look at how memory may be altered or constructed in response to stress. Astronomers evaluate the star map hypotheses while noting the challenges of drawing firm conclusions from ambiguous visual patterns. Historians and sociologists analyze how the case fit into a changing cultural landscape during the 1960s. The case does not yield neat or final answers. Those who believe the encounter reflects contact with visitors from a far point, to consistencies in the couple's accounts, and to physical traces reported at the scene. Those who prefer natural explanations stress how memory can be influenced by emotion, suggestion, and cultural imagery. Both perspectives highlight the importance of careful, methodical investigation and of acknowledging uncertainty when evidence is incomplete or ambiguous. What makes the Hills story especially valuable is that it combines ordinary human lives with an event that challenged their sense of reality. Whether one interprets their experience as an encounter with otherworldly visitors or as a compelling instance of how the mind responds to stress and unusual stimuli, the account invites respectful curiosity. The Hills did not demand blind belief. They reported what they experienced and allowed others to evaluate it with the tools available. In the end, the story of Betty and Barney Hill remains a case study in how personal testimony, medical practice, cultural context, and scientific inquiry intersect. It reminds us that near-ordinary moments can lead to enduring mysteries, and that the search for understanding benefits from calm, careful examination rather than sensationalism. And if nothing else, their experience proves that a routine drive home can become material for lifelong debate. If you are looking for a tidy conclusion, you will not find one here. What you will find is a richly documented episode that continues to teach us about memory, evidence, and the enduring human habit of trying to make sense of what lies beyond everyday experience. Some stories refuse to behave in a tidy manner. They do not build neatly toward a climactic revelation. They offer no definitive explanation, and they do not resolve into a moral or neat lesson. Instead, they remain where they were placed and stare back at anyone who tries to fold them into a tidy framework. The Sandown Ghost Clown is one of those stories. It does not roar, it does not menace, it does not snatch, punish, or curse. It appears, communicates in a way that does not quite fit, and then it leaves. What lingers afterward is not ordinary fright. It is a peculiar, persistent wrongness, like an off-color joke told by someone who does not quite understand humor, or like a sentence left unfinished in a paragraph that otherwise makes perfect sense. This is the case of All Colors Sam, the Sandown Clown.
Two witnesses. December, Rendlesham. 3 lights, no radar return. Why? If it's real, someone's going to want it buried.
The incident occurred in 1973 at Lake Common, a neatly kept expanse of grass on the Isle of Wight near the seaside town of Sandown. The witnesses were 2 children, both 7 years old. The being they encountered announced itself with a single sentence. The words were simple, plain, and strange. All colors, Sam. Lake Common itself was not a place where one expects legends to begin. It was open, maintained, and bordered by a golf course whose trimming and order seemed designed to impose a human measure on the landscape. It was a place for sunlight, for picnics, for ordinary afternoons, and the small rites of childhood. It was not a place that suggested sudden ruptures in reality.
Summer 1973. Sandown was unsettled by a mysterious visitor. Some questions remain.
2 children saw something no one could explain. Half a century later, the place is still quiet, but the story lingers.
It's the kind of place where children wandered freely, where silence was common and unremarkable. In 1973, the Isle of Wight was not a hotspot for sensational stories or media-driven hysteria. It was quiet, almost too quiet. On that day, 2 children, one of them a girl often referred to as Faye, were playing outdoors, immersed in the innocent, unstructured world of childhood. There was no expectation of danger, no sense of anticipation. The world, as they knew it, was stable. Then the sound began. It was not music, not speech, not the voice of an animal. The children later described it as a loud, wailing noise, mechanical, oscillating, almost siren-like. It did not rise and fall naturally, nor did it echo in a way that matched the environment. It felt placed, as though it had been introduced into the landscape rather than produced by it. The sound did not frighten them at first. It beckoned. That detail alone is chilling. The encounter did not begin with fear, but with curiosity, an invitation rather than an intrusion. Something was calling, and the children answered, following the sound. Drawn forward by the strange noise, the children moved toward its source. Each step carried them further away from the familiar and deeper into something undefined. The sound neither faded nor grew louder in a predictable way. It simply persisted, as though maintaining a deliberate distance. Unlike many paranormal encounters that occur in flashes or fragments, this moment unfolded slowly. Time did not distort. Reality did not blur. There was no sudden rupture. Instead, the children walked calmly into an experience that would haunt researchers for decades. When the source of the sound finally revealed itself, it did not rush toward them. It did not hide. It stood, waiting. The first sight of the entity. In an open area, framed by trees and muted daylight, stood a tall, humanoid figure. It was over 7 feet in height, with limbs that appeared elongated and proportions that felt subtly wrong. Not grotesque enough to provoke immediate terror, but wrong enough to make the mind hesitate. The children did not run. This is one of the most unnerving aspects of the case. Despite the entity's unnatural appearance, there was no immediate panic. Instead, there was observation. The children watched, and the figure allowed itself to be watched. Its appearance has been described repeatedly as clown-like, but not in the way one might expect. There was no painted grin, no exaggerated cheer. The resemblance lay in its simplicity and artificiality. It wore clothing that appeared mismatched and outdated, as though assembled from an incomplete understanding of human attire. A pointed hat or hood sat atop its head, giving it a vaguely ceremonial silhouette. Its face was the most disturbing feature. Pale and circular, it bore simple geometric shapes where human features should have been: triangular eyes, a square nose, yellow lips. The children could not determine whether they were looking at a mask, a costume, or something organic. The face did not change expression. It did not blink in a familiar way. It simply existed. The children's reaction is perhaps the most discomforting element of the story. Children often provide an unfiltered response, but in this episode there was very little melodrama. The figure did not storm them or lunge at them. Instead, it produced a small notebook and a pencil. It began to write. When it had finished, it held the notebook up for the children to read. The words in clear, simple handwriting read, "Hello, and I am all colors, Sam."
Hello, are you still there?
Hello, and I am all colors, Sam.
The phrase presented itself without explanation. There was no attempt to elaborate, to justify, or to offer context. The figure then tried to speak. The voice the children reported was off.
Hello, are you still there?
It sounded metallic and mechanical, as though English were not a language learned, but an instrument approximated by an unfamiliar vocal apparatus. Some syllables came through, others dissolved into noise. When asked whether it was a man or a human being, the being offered no human answer. It said, vaguely, that it existed differently and that it was here, but not always here. The children moved closer and heard the voice again. Sam's lips barely moved, and its words were muffled, like someone speaking without fully opening their mouth. Sam asked the children some questions, and they returned the favor. When they asked why its shirt and pants were torn, Sam said it had no other clothes. Asked if it was a man, Sam chuckled and said, no. When they asked if it was a ghost, it replied, well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way. Pressed about what it was, if not a man or a ghost, Sam answered, you know. It then claimed to have no name, despite having introduced itself earlier, told them others like it existed, and sketched a rough image of one of its kind.
There are others, like me, here on Earth.
Sam also said it was afraid of humans and feared being hurt. While the children talked, they noticed two workers on a nearby electrical pole who seemed oblivious to the scene. Afterwards, Sam invited the children into the small metal hut it said it had just finished building.
Hello, are you still there? Come in, it's warm inside.
They crawled through a flap into a room with simple wooden furniture, an electric heater, and a high ceiling. The walls were covered in a blue-green wallpaper patterned with dials. It was unclear whether the dials were merely decorative or actually mechanical. The children mentioned a small upper-level room with a metal floor, though it's uncertain if they went up. Inside, Sam removed its hat, revealing round white ears and sparse brown hair. The conversation continued for at least 30 minutes. Sam said it ate berries picked in the late afternoon, drank purified river water, and had visited a mainland camp. It also performed what Faye called a conjuring trick. Sam placed a berry in its ear, thrust its head forward until the berry reappeared by one eye, then, with further movements, made it vanish and reappear at its mouth. Eventually, the children said goodbye, left the hut, and on their way home across a golf course told a man they had seen a ghost, or someone dressed like one, before returning home. 3 weeks later, on June 2nd, Faye told her father, known only as Mr. Y, about the strange events. He was hesitant at first to take the story seriously.
He had a red nose and shoes this big, and when he smiled, it was all paint. He popped out of nowhere right by the lane.
But Faye, a clown? Are you certain? There must be an explanation. It's all rather strange, isn't it?
Excuse me, I'm looking for the parents of the boy who spoke about the clown. It's quite important.
You're speaking to them?
but he eventually followed up with the boy, who confirmed his daughter's account. Mr. Y visited the site of the encounter but found no trace of the metal hut or any sign of Sam. He had not told Faye, however, that he had experienced unusual events himself over the previous 2.5 years. Around 7 p.m. on October 20th, 1970, while driving east to see a friend in Ryde on the northeast coast of the Isle of Wight, Mr. Y saw a very large lit object in the sky to his right, about halfway between the road and the village of Bembridge. He stopped the car to watch as the object hovered silently over swampland connected to the Yar River.
What in heaven? That's no aircraft. Let's see where you mean to go. They're climbing. Good Lord.
Drifting aimlessly at a low altitude, Mr. Y described 7 or more large spherical lights arranged in a wide ring, each like a bright red cherry, with a turquoise light and a white light between each red one. When he resumed driving, the object followed alongside him until he left the town. It then moved across his path until it was roughly 300 yards behind him. The craft slowly descended and drifted over some hedges.
Easy now. Steady.
Mr. Y stopped again and used a flashlight to try to signal it. From a greater distance, the object appeared smaller, and only 4 red lights were visible, now seeming to rotate slowly. Mr. Y signaled for 10 minutes while the craft weaved back and forth, as Oliver described it. He drove on, and the red lights were still visible when he arrived at his friend's house. Once his friend joined him outside, they watched the craft dart in and out from behind trees, one of the men comparing it to a game of hide-and-seek.
Look there, by the elm. It's quick as a sparrow. We're losing it.
Mr. Y later drove to Ryde and lost sight of it. In the months that followed, Mr. Y reported seeing several solitary balls of red light that hovered or followed him. On March 1st, 1972, at Compton Bay on the island's southwest coast, an unexpected tidal surge forced him up onto a cliff where he was stranded until the tide receded. He then noticed 2 yellow lights just below the water surface about 40 feet away, looking up at him like the eyes of some terrible sea creature. Mr. Y had never told Faye about his experiences before her encounter with Sam, but he believed her experience was connected to his own and felt he should tell someone.
Rendlesham, 3 lights, no radar return. What are you? If it's real, someone's going to want it buried. Need the radar logs before they disappear.
Where are they now? After the encounter with the strange figure later referred to as Sam, Mr. Y reacted with unusual restraint and care. Rather than dismissing the children's account as imagination or exaggeration, he took their descriptions seriously and wrote down what they reported in detail. His approach was calm and deliberate, focused on accuracy rather than excitement. From the beginning, he treated the incident as something genuinely strange, not something to be dramatized. Mr. Y eventually submitted the account to the British UFO Research Association, BUFORA, one of the primary investigative groups operating in the United Kingdom during the 1970s. The case was later examined and preserved by researcher Jenny Randalls, who recognized its unusual consistency and ensured it was archived without sensational treatment. Mr. Y insisted on anonymity throughout the process and refused all publicity, which is why he has remained known only by a pseudonym. After filing the report, Mr. Y withdrew completely from paranormal research circles. He later moved abroad and did not take part in interviews, documentaries, or follow-up investigations. He never attempted to profit from the story and never publicly changed or retracted his position. He remained convinced that his daughter and her friend had been truthful and that the encounter could not be easily explained. Mr. Y died several years later, though the exact date and circumstances of his death were never made public. Some say sometime around 2005. His anonymity was maintained until the end of his life, and no personal records or statements surfaced afterward to contradict the account. His death effectively closed the door on any further clarification from the adult most closely involved in reporting the incident. Faye, his daughter, grew up and lived a largely private adult life, well removed from the paranormal community. As an adult, she briefly reaffirmed that she stood by her childhood account and that the experience had been real and memorable, not a dream or a misunderstanding. She did not seek attention, give interviews, or involve herself in discussions about the case. The absence of later commentary from both Mr. Y and Faye is one of the most unsettling aspects of the Sandown Clown case. There were no dramatic reversals, no confessions, and no attempts to exploit the story for attention or profit. Instead, the case ended quietly, with a disturbing report carefully filed and then left alone, unchanged, unresolved, and oddly intact.